Hey yo, it's a cozy day because it's rainy outside, so I am in my jacket. I don't have the baby, I dropped him off. Um, I'm just, oh, that was my switch going off. That's what was going off. I was so confused. I was like, dun, 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 dun. I was like, oh, it's my switch. I had an alarm for a game, for like the, words for the ring fit, that's what it's called for the Switch. Okay, so I swear I had a bit thing for change my glasses. Man, all these I did them. Well, that's an easy way to find that. That was cool. There's the request queue. Perfect. I found that. Maybe it wasn't a sound alert. Maybe it was a Twitch thing, maybe? Bits badges. I have all these and I haven't uploaded them. That's okay. So, good morning, Allegrata. I'm trying to figure out where I can find what I have to use the bits for like, kind of like whatever the channel points are, but for the bits, I think, maybe if I pull myself up, my channel alerts, latest follows, Tangia? I have no idea. Okay, sound alerts. Okay, these are the bits, okay. Duck song, no, these are the latest follows. Oh well. I have like a bit thing for changing my glasses. I don't know where it's at. And my Elgato isn't working, so then I'm like, I have to click everything. Perfect, there we go. Comfy, cozy day. Sweatpants and a sweatshirt because it's rainy outside. Ooh, I need to drink some coffee because I'd be hungry and I don't need to eat. French vanilla in my Mike Wazowski mug. Okay. My alarm on my Switch is going off again. I had a whole like, what is that sound? It's my Switch. Okay. So, joke of the day. How do you make a robot angry? You push all its buttons. Man, I just remembered my Elgato's not working, so I can't clip my own things with my Elgato. Okay, here we go. There you go. I'm working on it. You can't see it, but I clipped it, and I'll work on it. This is so much more tedious than if I did it with the Elgato. Perfect, okay. Joke of the day. Okay. Ta-da! I did it. I'm just gonna leave that up so then it's in the background. So then if I need to clip something again because my Elgato's not working, I'll be okay. Okay. I almost hit myself in the face with this. We're reading! And I like that I have my camera switched to where you can actually read it and it's not like backwards. And my camera inverted. I'm using a bumper car sticker as my bookmark from my college. Okay. Turn up the music on my headphones so I can hear it a little better. It's just, I got lo-fi beats in the background, so it's just really good for that. Oh, I put on my Discord. Okay, so we're gonna vote on Discord. Oh, I spelled Discord wrong. Okay. Discord in hashtag book talk. Vote on Discord and book talk for the best day to do my reading streams. Okay. I'm gonna pin it. And ta-da. Okay. Ta-da! Vote on Discord and book talk for the best day to do my reading stream. Perfect. Did the command not work, or is it because I put it in everything else that it didn't work? Oh, there we go. Yeah, okay, so it's because I typed it with all the other stuff. Whoa! Cat on the run. Okay, I am producing my own energy today, so also it's really smoky outside, so my throat already hurts, so just to let you know, I might be really raspy at some point, or get really tired really quickly. Did I take the bookmark out and then close the page? No, oh my god, I thought I did. I almost freaked out. Okay. Okay, so do I need to turn Spotify down? Should just be like background noise. And again, this would be a lot easier with my Elgato. My switch is going off again. Okay, so City of Bones, cats, quit it. Cats are fighting. Okay, City of Bones, first book of the Mortal Instruments series by Cassandra Clare. We are on Chapter 7, The 5-Dimensional Door. I'm not ready to remember what these voices are. Okay. So Madame Dorothea's apartment seemed to have roughly the same layout as Clary's, though she'd made a very different use of the space. The entryway, reeking of incense, was huge, with bead curtains and astrological posters. One showed the constellation of the zodiac, another a guide to Chinese magical symbols, and another showed a hand with fingers spread, each line on the palm carefully labeled. Above the hand, Latinate Latin script spelled out the words, In Manibus Fortuna. Narrow shelves holding stacked books ran along the wall beside the door. One of the bead curtains rattled, and Madame Dorothea poked her head through. Interested in... Ooh, okay, so voice. I gotta remember I did voices. I can't just... read. Okay. Interested in... I don't know how I did her voice. It's like, I did like old. Man, guys, like a week apart between doing voices for like characters in a book is hard. Interested in chiromancy? She said, noting Clary's gaze, or just nosy. Neither, Clary said. Can you really tell fortunes? My mother had a great talent. She could see a man's fortune in his hand or the leaves at the bottom of his teacup. She taught me some of her tricks. She transferred her gaze to Jace. Speaking of tea, young man, would you like some? What? Jace said, looking flustered. Tea. I find it both settles the stomach and concentrates the mind. Wonderful drink, tea. I'll have tea, Clary said, realizing how long it had been since she had eaten or drunk anything. She felt as if she had been running on pure adrenaline since she'd woke up. Jace succumbed. All right, as long as it isn't Earl Grey, he added, wrinkling his fine-boned nose. I hate bergamot. Madame Dorothea cackled loudly and disappeared back through the bead curtain, leaving it swaying gently behind her. Clary raised her eyebrows at Jace. You hate bergamot? Jace had wandered over to the narrow bookshelf and was examining its contents. You have a problem with that? You may be the only guy my age I've ever met who knows what bergamot is, much less that it's an Earl Grey tea. Yes, well, Jace said with a surreptitious look. I'm not like other guys. Besides, he added, flipping a book off the shelf, at the Institute, we have to take classes in basic medicinal uses for plants. It's required. I figured all your classes were stuff like Slaughter 101 and Beheading for Beginners. Jace flipped a page. Very funny, Frey. Clary, who had been studying the palmistry poster, whirled on him. Don't call me that. He glanced up surprised. Why not? It's your last name, isn't it? The image of Simon rose up behind her eyes. Simon, the last time she had seen him, staring after her as she ran out of Java Jones. She turned back to the poster, blinking. No reason. I see, Jace said, and she could tell from his voice that he did see, more than she wanted him to. She heard him drop the book back onto the shelf. This must be the trash she keeps up front to impress credible mundanes, he said, sounding disgusted. There's not one serious text here. Just because it's not the kind of magic you do, Clary began crossly. He scowled furiously, silencing her. I do not do magic, he said. Get it through your head. Human beings are not magic users. It's part of what makes them human. Warlocks can only use magic because they have demon blood. Clary took a moment to process this. But I've seen you use magic. Magic is really hard for me today. I've seen you use magic. You used enchanted weapons. I use tools that are magical. And just to be able to do that, I have to undergo rigorous training. The rune tattoos on my skin protect me too. If you tried to use one of the seraph blades, for instance, it'd probably burn your skin, maybe kill you. What if I got the tattoos? Clary asked. Would I use them then? No, Jay said crossly. The marks are only part of it. There are tests, ordeals, level of training. Look, just forget it, okay? Stay away from the blades. In fact, don't touch any of my weapons without my permission. Well, there goes my plan for selling them all on eBay, Clary muttered. Selling them on what? Clary smiled blandly at him. A magical place of great magical power. Jace looked confused, then shrugged. Most myths are true, at least in part. I'm starting to get that. The bead curtain rattled again, and Madame Dorothea's head appeared. Tea's on the table, she said. There's no need for you two to keep standing there like donkeys. Come into the parlor. There's a parlor? Clary said. Of course there's a parlor, said Dorothea. Where else would I entertain? I'll just leave my hat with the footman, said Jace. Madame Dorothea shot him a dark look. If you were half as funny as you thought you were, my boy, you'd be twice as funny as you are. She disappeared back through the curtain. Her loud nearly drowned out my rattling beads. Jace frowned. I'm not quite sure what she meant by that. Really, said Clary. It made perfect sense to me. She marched through the bead curtain before he could reply. The parlor was so dimly lit that it took several blinks for Clary's eyes to adjust. Faint light outlined the black velvet curtains down across the entire left wall. Stuffed birds and bats dangled from the ceiling on thin cords. Shiny dark beads where their eyes should have been. The floor was layered with frayed Persian rugs that spat up puffs of dust underfoot. A group of overstuffed pink armchairs were gathered around a low table. A stack of tarot cards, bound with a silk ribbon, occupied one end of the table, a crystal ball and a gold stand the other. In the middle of the table was a silver tea service, laid out for company. A neat plate of stacked sandwiches, a blue teapot unfurling a thin stream of white steam, and two teacups on matching saucers set carefully in front of two of the armchairs. Wow, Clary said weakly. This looks great. She took a seat in one of the armchairs. It felt good to sit down. Dorothea smiled, her eyes glinted with a sly humor. Have some tea, she said, hefting the pot. Milk? Sugar? Clary looked sideways at Jace, who was sitting beside her and who had taken possession of the sandwich plate. He was examining it closely. Sugar, she said. Jace shrugged, took a sandwich, and set the plate down. Clary watched him warily as he bit into it. He shrugged again. Cucumber, he said, in response to her stare. I always think cucumber sandwiches are just the thing for tea, don't you? Madame Dorothy inquired, if no one in particular. I hate cucumber, Jace said, and handed the rest of his sandwich to Clary. She bit into it, and it was seasoned with just the right amount of mayonnaise and pepper. Her stomach rumbled in grateful appreciation of the first food she tasted since the nachos she'd eaten with Simon. Cucumber and bergamot, Clary said. Is there anything else you hate that I ought to know about? Jace looked at Dorothea over the rim of his teacup. Liars, he said. Calmly, the old woman set her teapot down. You can call me a liar all you'd like. It's true, I'm not a warlock, but my mother was. Jace choked on his tea. That's impossible. Why impossible? Clary asked curiously. She took a sip of her tea. It was bitter, strongly flavored with a peaty smokiness. Jace expelled a breath. Because they're half human, half demon. All warlocks are crossbreeds. And because they're crossbreeds, they can't have children. They're sterile. Like mules? Clary said thoughtfully, remembering something from biology class. Mule are sterile crossbreeds. Your knowledge of livestock is astounding, said Jace. All downworlders are in some part demon, but only warlocks are the children of demon parents. It's why their powers are the strongest. Vampires and werewolves, they're part demon too? And fairies? Vampires and werewolves are the result of disease brought by demons from their home dimensions. Most demon diseases are deadly to humans, but in these cases they work strange They worked strange changes into the infected, without actually killing them. And fairies are fallen angels, said Dorothea, cast down out of heaven for their pride. That's the legend, Jace said. It's also said that they're the offspring of demons and angels, which always seemed more likely to me. Good and evil mixing together. Fairies are as beautiful as angels are supposed to be, but they have a lot of mischief and cruelty in them. Clary said, supposed to be? You mean angels don't? Enough about angels, said Dorothea, suddenly practical. It's true that warlocks can't have children. My mother adopted me because she wanted to make sure there'd be someone to attend this place after she was gone. I don't have to master magic myself. I have only to watch and guard. Guard what? Said Clary. What indeed? With a wink, the older one reached for a sandwich from the plate, but it was empty. Clary had eaten them all. Dorothea chuckled. It's good to see a young woman eat her fill. In my day, girls were robust, strapping creatures, not twigs like they are nowadays. Thanks, Claire said. She thought of Isabel's tiny waist and felt suddenly gigantic. She set her empty teacup down with a clatter. Instantly, Madame Dorothea pounced on the cup and stared into it intently. A line appeared between her penciled eyebrows. Ugh. Coffee. Okay. What? Clary said, nervously. Did I crack the cup or something? She's reading your tea leaves, Jay said, sounding bored. But he leaned forward along with Clary as Dorothea turned the cup around and around in her thick fingers, scowling. Is it bad? Clary asked. It is neither bad nor good. It is confusing. Dorothea looked at Jace. Give me your cup, she commanded. Jace looked affronted. But I'm not done with my... The old woman snatched the cup out of his hand and splashed the excess tea back into the pot. Frowning, she gazed at what remained. I see violence in your future. A great deal of bloodshed by you and others. You'll fall in love with the wrong person. Also, you have an enemy. Only one? That's good news. Jace leaned back in his chair as Dorothea put down his cup and picked up Clary's again. She shook her head. There is nothing for me to read here. The images are jumbled, meaningless. She glanced at Clary. Is there a block in your mind? Clary was puzzled. A what? Like a spell that might conceal a memory, or might have blocked out your sight? Clary shook her head. No, of course not. Jace leaned forward alertly. Don't be so hasty, he said. It's true that she claims not to remember ever having had the sight before this week. Maybe I'm just a late developer, Clary snapped. And don't leer at me just because I said that. Jace assumed an injured air. I wasn't going to. You were working up to a leer, I could tell. Maybe, Jace acknowledged, but that doesn't mean I'm not right. Something's blocking your memories. I'm almost sure of it. Very well. Let's try something else. Dorothy put the cup down and reached for the silk-wrapped tarot cards. She fanned the cards and held them out to Clary. Slide your hand over these until you touch one that feels hot or cold, or seems to cling to your fingers. Then draw that one and show it to me. Obediently, Clary ran her fingers over the cards. They felt cool to the touch and slippery, but none seemed particularly warm or cold, and none stuck to her fingers. Finally, she selected one at random and held it up. The Ace of Cups, Dorothea said, sounding bemused. The love card. Clary turned it over and looked at it. The card was heavy in her hand, the image on the front thick with real paint. It showed a hand holding up a cup in front of a rayed sun painted with gilt. The cup was made of gold, engraved with a pattern of smaller suns, and studded with rubies. The style of the artwork was familiar to her as her own breath. This is a good card, right? Not necessarily, said Madame Dorothea, her eyes gleaming, but it is a powerful card. What does it mean to you? That my mother painted it, said Clary, and dropped the card onto the table. She did, didn't she? Dorothea nodded, and a look of pleased satisfaction on her face. She painted the whole pack. A gift for me. So you say. Jace stood up, his eyes cold. How well did you know Clary's mother? Clary craned her head to look at him. Jace, you don't have to. Dorothea sat back in her chair, the cards fanned out across her wide chest. Jocelyn knew what I was, and I knew what she was. We didn't talk about it much. Sometimes she did favors for me, like painting this pack of cards, and in return I'd tell her the occasional piece of downworld gossip. There was a name she asked me to keep an ear out for, and I did. Jace's expression was unreadable. What name was that? Valentine. Clary sat straight up in her chair. But that's... And when you say you knew what Jocelyn was, what do you mean? What was she? Jace asked. Jocelyn was what she was, said Dorothea. But in her past, she'd been like you. A shadow hunter. One of the clave. No, Clary whispered. Dorothea looked at her with sad, almost kindly eyes. It's true. She chose to live in this house precisely because... Because this is a sanctuary, Jace said to Dorothea. Isn't it? Your mother was a warlock. She made this space. Hidden. Protected. Probably surrounded by wards. It's a perfect spot for downworlders on the run to hide out. That's what you do, isn't it? You hide criminals here? Oh. You would call them that, Dorothea said. You're familiar with the motto of the Covenant? Sed lex Dorlex, said Jace automatically. The law is hard, but it is the law. Sometimes the law is too hard. I know the clave would have taken me away from my mother if they could. You want me to let them do the same to others? So you're a philanthropist? Jace's lip curled. I suppose you'd expect me to believe that downworlders don't pay you handsomely for the privilege of your sanctuary? Dorothea grinned, wide enough to show a flash of gold molars. We can't all get by on our looks like you. Jace looked unmoved by the flattery. I should tell the clave about you. You can't. Clary was on her feet now. You promised. I never promised anything. Jace looked mutinous. He strode to the wall and tore aside one of the velvet hangings. You want to tell me what this is? He demanded. It's a door, Jace, said Clary. It was a door, set strangely in the wall between the two bay windows. Clearly, it couldn't be a door that led anywhere, or it would have been visible from the outside of the house. Oh, that got me. Okay. It looked as if it were made of some softly glowing metal, more buttery than brass, but as heavy as iron. The knob had been cast in the shape of an eye. Shut up, Jace said angrily. It's a portal, isn't it? It's a 5-dimensional door, said Dorothea, laying the tarot cards back on the table. Dimensions aren't all straight lines, you know, she added, in response to Clary's blank look. There are dips and folds and nooks and crannies all tucked away. It's a bit hard to explain when you've never studied dimensional theory, but, in essence, the door can take you anywhere in this dimension that you want to go. It's an escape hatch, Jace said. That's why your mother wanted to live here. She could always flee at a moment's notice. Then why didn't she? Clary began and broke off, suddenly horrified. Because of me, she said. She wouldn't leave without me that night, so she stayed. Jace was shaking his head. You can't blame yourself. Feeling tears gather under her eyelids, Clary pushed past Jace to the door. I want to see where she would have gone, she said, reaching for the door. I want to see where she was going to. Clary, no! Jace reached at her, but her fingers had already closed around the knob. It spun rapidly under her hand, the door flying open as if she'd pushed it. Dorothea lumbered to her feet with a cry, but it was too late. Before she could even finish her sentence, Clary found herself flung forward and tumbling through empty space. Ah! Okay. Chapter 8. Oh, stretch. 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 Back popping. Coffee drinking. Book reading. Chapter 8. Weapon of Choice. She was too surprised to scream. The sensation of falling was the worst part. Her heart flew up into her throat and her stomach turned to water. She flung her hands out, trying to catch at something, anything that might slow her descent. Her hands closed on branches. Leaves tore off in her grip. She thumped to the ground hard, her hip and shoulder striking packed earth. She rolled over, sucking the air back into her lungs. She was just beginning to sit up when someone landed on top of her. She was knocked backward. A forehead banged against hers, her knees banged against someone else's. Tangled up in arms and legs, Clary coughed hair, not her own, out of her mouth, and tried to struggle out from under the weight that felt like it was crushing her flat. "Ouch," Jace said in her ear, his tone indignant. "You elbowed me." "Well, you landed on me." He leveled himself up on his arms and looked down at her placidly. Clary could see blue sky above his head, a bit of tree branch, and the corner of a gray clapboard house. "Well, you didn't leave me much choice, did you?" he asked. "Not after you decided to leap merrily through the portal like you were jumping the F train. You're just lucky it didn't dump us out in the East River." "You didn't have to come after me." "Yes, I did," he said. "You're far too inexperienced to protect yourself in a hostile situation without me." "That's sweet. Maybe I'll forgive you." "Forgive me? For what?" "For telling me to shut up." His eyes narrowed. "I did not." "Well, I did, but you were—" "Never mind." Her arm pinned under her back was beginning to cramp. Rolling to the side to free it, she saw the brown grass of a dead lawn, a chain-link fence, and more of the gray clapboard house, now distressingly familiar. She froze. "I know where we are." Jace stopped sputtering. "What?" "This is Luke's house." She sat up, pitching Jace to the side. He rolled gracefully to his feet and held out a hand to help her up. She ignored him and scrambled upright, shaking out her numb arm. They stood in front of a small gray row house, nestled among the other row houses that lined the Williamsburg waterfront. A breeze blew off the East River, settling a small sign swinging over the brick front steps. Clary watched Jace as he read the block-lettered words aloud. "Garraway Books. Fine used. New and out of print. Closed Saturdays." He glanced at the dark front door, its knob wound with heavy padlock. A few days' worth of mail lay on the doormat, untouched. He glanced at Clary. "He lives in a bookstore?" "He lives behind the store." Clary glanced up and down the empty street, which was bordered on one end by the arched span of a Williamsburg bridge and by a deserted sugar factory on the other. Across the sluggishly moving river, the sun was setting behind the skyscrapers of lower Manhattan, outlining them in gold. "Jace, how did we get here?" "Through the portal," Jace said, examining the padlock. "It takes you to whatever place you're thinking of." "But I wasn't thinking of here," Clary objected. "I wasn't thinking of anywhere." "You must have been." He dropped the subject, seeming uninterested. "So, since we're here anyway..." "Yeah?" "What do you want to do?" "Leave, I guess," Clary said bitterly. "Luke told me not to come here." Jace shook his head. "And you just accept that?" Clary hugged her arms around herself. Despite the fading heat of the day, she felt cold. "Do I have a choice?" "We always have choices," Jace said. "If I were you, I'd be pretty curious about what Luke's doing right now. Do you have keys to the house?" Clary shook her head. "No, but sometimes he leaves the back door unlocked." She pointed to the narrow alley between Luke's row house and the next. Plastic trash cans were propped up in a neat row beside stacks of folded newspaper and a plastic tub of empty soda bottles. At least Luke was still a responsible recycler. "You sure he isn't home?" Jace asked. She glanced at the empty curb. "Well, his truck's gone, the store's closed, and all the lights are off. I'd say probably not." "Then lead the way." The narrow aisle between the row houses ended in a high chain link fence. It surrounded Luke's small back garden, where the only plants flourishing seemed to be the weeds that had sprung up through the paving stones. cracking them into powdery shards. How'd I get dowry? Up and over, Jace said, jamming the toe of a boot into a gap in the fence. He began to climb. The fence rattled so loudly that Clary glanced around nervously, but there was no lights on in the neighbors' houses. Jace cleared the top of the fence and sprang down the other side. There's a fly! Touching me! No touchy. Jace cleared the top of the fence and sprang down the other side, landing in the bushes to the accompaniment of an ear-splitting yowl. It's a hard word. For a moment, Clary thought he must have landed on a stray cat. She heard Jace shout in surprise as he fell backward. A dark shadow, much too big to be feline, exploded out of the shrubbery and streaked across the yard, keeping low. Rolling to his feet, Jace darted after it, looking murderous. Clary started to climb. As she threw her leg over the top of the fence, Isabel's jeans caught on a twist of wire and tore up the side. She dropped to the ground. She was scuffing the soft dirt, just as Jace cried out in triumph. Got him! Clary turned to see Jace sitting on top of the prone intruder, whose arms were up over his head. Jace grabbed for his wrist. Come on, let's see your face. Get the hell off me, you pretentious asshole, the intruder snarled, shoving at Jace. He struggled halfway into a sitting position, his battered glasses knocked askew. Clary stopped dead in her tracks. Simon? Oh, God, said Jace, sounding resigned, and here I'd actually hoped I'd got hold of something interesting. But what were you doing hiding in Luke's bushes? Clary asked, brushing leaves out of Simon's hair. There was a gap, so like the interesting gap in reading. He suffered her ministrations with glaring bad grace. Somehow, when she'd pictured her reunion with Simon, when all this was over, he'd been in a better mood. That's the part I don't get. All right, that's enough. I can fix my own hair fray, Simon said, jerking away from her touch. They were sitting on the steps of Luke's back porch. Jace had propped himself on the porch railing and was assiduously pretending to ignore them, while using the steel to file the edges of his fingernails. Clary wondered if the clave would approve. I mean, did Luke know you were there? She asked. Of course he didn't know I was there, Simon said irritably. I've never asked him, but I'm sure he has a fairly stringent policy about random teenagers lurking in his shrubbery. You're not random. He knows you. She wanted to reach out and touch his cheek, still bleeding slightly where a branch had scratched it. The main thing is that you're all right. That I'm all right? Simon laughed, a sharp, unhappy sound. Clary, do you have any idea what I've been through this past couple of days? The last time I saw you, you were running out of Java Jones like a bat out of hell, and then you just disappeared. You never picked up your cell, then your home phone was disconnected, then Luke told me you were off staying with some relatives upstate when I know you don't have any other relatives. I thought I'd done something to piss you off. What could you possibly have done? Clary reached for his hand, but he pulled it back without looking at her. I don't know, he said. Something. Jay, still occupied with the steel, chuckled low under his breath. You're my best friend, Clary said. I wasn't mad at you. You clearly just couldn't be bothered to call me and tell me you were shacking up with some dyed blonde wannabe goth you probably met at Pandemonium, Simon pointed out sourly, after I spent the past 3 days wondering if you were dead. I was not shacking up, Clary said, glad at the darkness as the blood rushed to her face. And my hair is naturally blonde, said Jace, just for the record. So what have you been doing these past 3 days then? Simon said, his eyes dark with suspicion. Do you really have a great Aunt Matilda who contracted avian flu and needed to be nursed back to health? Did Luke actually say that? No, he just said you had gone to visit a sick relative and that your phone probably just didn't work out in the country. Not that I believed him. After he shooed me off his front porch, I went around the side of the house and looked in the back window. Watched him packing up a green duffel bag like he was going away for the weekend. That was when I decided to stick around and keep an eye on things. Why? Because he was packing a bag? He was packing it full of weapons, Simon said, scrubbing at the blood on his cheek with the sleeve of his t-shirt.
Knives, a couple daggers, even a sword. Funny thing is, some of the weapons looked like they were glowing. He looked from Clary to Jace and back again. His tone was edged as sharply as one of Luke's knives. Now, are you going to say I was imagining it? No, Clary said. I'm not going to say that. She glanced at Jace. The last light of sunset struck gold sparks from his eyes. She said, I'm going to tell him the truth. I know. Are you going to stop me? He looked down at the steel in his hand. My oath to covenant binds me. No such oath binds you, he said. She turned back to Simon, taking a deep breath. All right, she said. Here's what you have to know. Gap. I just like, it's not like sometimes it's a change of viewpoint, and sometimes it's like a time gap in the book. It's just there's a gap between the last sentence and the next sentence. Mike Wazowski. Oh my gosh, I think it was Cece is one of my chatters, and she put up like something. She showed me, it's like a mug heater. It's like a little like plate that's a cute it's like a loafy cat, and it's like you put your mug on it and it heats your coffee, because like my coffee's cold, and it'd be perfect for my desk. I put it on my wish list, but I think it's absolutely adorable. It'd be a good like Christmas gift, I think. Send it to like my parents or something. I want this. Okay. Okay. The sun had slipped entirely past the horizon, and the porch was in darkness by the time Clary stopped speaking. Simon had listened to her lengthy explanation with a nearly impassive expression, only wincing a little when she got to the part about the Ravener demon. When she was done speaking, she cleared her dry throat, suddenly dying for a glass of water. So, she said, any questions? Simon held up his hand. Oh, I've got questions. Several. Clary exhaled warily. Okay. Shoot. He pointed at Jace. Now, he's a... What do you call people like him again? He's a shadow hunter, Clary said. A demon hunter, Jace clarified. I killed demons. It's not that complicated, really. Simon looked at Clary again. For real? His eyes were narrowed, as if he half expected her to tell him that none of it was true, and Jace was actually a dangerous escaped lunatic she decided to befriend on humanitarian grounds. For real? There was an intent look on Simon's face. And there are vampires, too? Werewolves, warlocks, all that stuff? Clary gnawed her lower lip. So I hear. And you kill them, too? Simon asked, directing the question to Jace, who had put the sail back in his pocket and was examining his flawless nails for defects. Only when they've been naughty. For a moment, Simon merely sat and stared down at his feet. Clary wondered if burdening him with this kind of information had been the wrong thing to do. He had a stronger practical streak than almost anyone else she knew. He might hate knowing something like this, something for which there was no logical explanation. She leaned forward anxiously, just as Simon lifted his head. This is so awesome, he said. Jace looked as startled as Clary felt. Awesome? Simon nodded enthusiastically, enough to make the dark curls bounce on his forehead. Totally. It's like Dungeons and Dragons, but real. Oh my god, I never realized that's what it said. It's like Dungeons and Dragons, but real. I am straight up... I need to mark this book. Hold up. Like, with spots that I'm about to... Oh my god. I'm about to be like that book nerd that's gonna mark pages for, like, things that I liked being said. About to be that person. I've never been that person before. I gotta go through my stuff, see if I can find some of those markers. Aha! Boom. That was easy. I found some. That was awesome. That was funny. I liked it. There's another page where there was like foreshadowing that I really liked. That I was like, oh yeah, I just remembered something. And it's a spoiler alert, so I'm not gonna say it. But okay, so this is like Dungeons and Dragons, but real. I was straight up marking that spot. That's hilarious. Oh, I haven't even used these yet. Awesome. Brand new. It's like Dungeons and Dragons, but real. I love that.
Okay. I marked it. I tabbed a book. I tabbed a book. That's so booky. Okay. I've been reading books my whole life, but, like, I've never tabbed a book. I'm about to tab it. I'm about to, like, later go back through this book and try to figure out where that other one is. Maybe. Ooh. I found it. Okay. Seem to like, okay. Okay, it's where Alec gets mad at her. There we go. Okay, I found it. I'm gonna do, like, blue for, like, funny. And pink for something else. I'm not gonna tell you because it'd be a spoiler. Pink. Okay. Okay. Continuing on. Sidetracked, sorry. Okay. Jace was looking at Simon as if he had some bizarre species of insect. It's like, what? Jace. Oh. It's a game, Clary explained. She felt vaguely embarrassed. People pretend to be wizards and elves and they kill monsters and stuff. I feel so mean. I feel so... My Dungeon and Dragon heart. Okay. Jace looked stupefied. Simon grinned. You've never heard of Dungeons and Dragons? I've heard of dungeons, Jace said. Also dragons, although they're mostly extinct. Simon looked disappointed. You've never killed a dragon? He's probably never met a 6 foot tall... Oh, shoot. Oh, never mind. Hold on. He's probably never met a 6 foot tall, hot elf woman in a fur bikini either, Clary said irritably. Lay off, Simon. Real elves are about 8 inches tall, Jace pointed out. Also, they bite. Hey, what's jammin'? Hi, Steph. It doesn't say hey, it says way, by the way. I am reading City of Bones. I'm reading, trying to do, like, audiobook style with, like, voices. I've gotten 19 pages in from when I started this morning. I've been on for an hour. I got to 19 pages. Ugh. Hurts me. Okay. But vampires are hot, right? Simon said. I mean, some of the vampires are babes, aren't they? Clary worried for a moment that Jace might lunge across the porch and throttle Simon senseless. Instead, he considered the question. Some of them. Maybe. Awesome, Simon repeated. Clary's decided she had preferred it when they were fighting. Jace slid off the porch railing. So, are we going to search the house or not? Simon scrambled to his feet. I'm game. What are we looking for? We, Chase said, with a sinister delicacy. I don't remember inviting you along. Maybe I was talking about protein. Whey protein. I got coffee. I didn't do a protein shake. I haven't done a protein shake in a really long time. But that's what I don't use whey protein either. I use like I think it's whey protein actually. It's chocolate. And I put peanut butter and ice and milk. And it is delicious. My cup's backwards. Mike Wazowski. Oh, yeah. I know me and my husband, we used to do, like, the vanilla protein. And then we do some yogurt. We do yogurt and egg, crushed up granola bar, chocolate chips, and then, like, milk and ice. That's what we used to do for our protein shakes. Oh, we do fruit. So it was fruit instead of ice. So it was frozen fruit, no ice. Ooh, iced espresso and oat milk. Yummy. That's awesome. I did I haven't done it since after I got pregnant, but I did a lot of the protein during my pregnancy because I wasn't intaking enough protein. And so I had to do protein shakes to, like, keep up with, like, the pregnancy protein that I needed. There are so many freaking books.
I have only read this one. So I've only read this book in the series, The Mortal Instruments. But then in The Mortal Instruments, there's 6 books total. There's a fly in here. I'm going to freak out. It's on my screen. And no fly swatter, and I don't want to hit my screen. Here's a headband. Can I test my aim? I hit it! Sorry. Okay. I'm okay. We're fine. Yep. We're clipping that real quick. That was exciting. In Mortal Instruments, there's 6 books total. There's a fly here. It's on my screen. Okay. But then in the Mortal Instruments, there's 6. Okay, did that. That was exciting. Oh, there's six books in the Mortal Instruments. And then after that is the Infernal Devices. There's 3 of those. Then the Dark Artifices. That's the Lady Midnight, Lord of Shadows. And then there's because these were the Mortal Instruments are the cities. So we have the City of Bones, City of Ashes, Glass, Fallen Angels, Lost Souls, Heavenly Fire. And then the Infernal Devices, they're the Clockwork Angel, Clockwork Prince, Clockwork Princess. The Dark Artifices is like the Lady Midnight, Lord of Shadows. And then I have 2 of like a different one that it's like the something gold and silver or something like that. So there's a lot. Cassandra Clare like did a lot of books. Okay, where was I? Oh. We, said Jace with a sinister delicacy. I don't remember inviting you along. Jace, Clary said angrily. The left corner of his mouth curled up. Just joking. He stepped aside to leave her a clear path to the door. Shall we? Clary fumbled to the doorknob in the dark. It opened, triggering the porch light, which illuminated the entryway. The door that led into the bookstore was closed. Clary jiggled the knob. It's locked. Allow me, mundanes, said Jace, setting her gently aside. He took his steel out of his pocket and put it in the door. Simon watched him with some resentment. No amount of vampire babes, Clary suspected, was ever going to make him like Jace. He's a piece of work, isn't he? Simon muttered. How do you stand him? He saved my life. Simon glanced at her quickly. How? With a click, the door swung open. Here we go, said Jace, sliding his steel back into his pocket. Clary saw the mark on the door just over his head fade as they passed through it. The back door opened into a small storage room, the bare walls peeling paint. Cardboard boxes were stacked everywhere. Their contents identified the marker scrolls. Identified with marker scrolls. Scrolls? There we go. It's struggle. I like my lofi beats in the background, by the way. I can hear them still, and I love it. I love lofi music. I also love lofi art, and I wish I was better at it. But I gotta practice at it anyway. I was trying to... My ADHD brain just went off. I am trying to make, like, my own overlay for stream that's, like, lofi themed. But, like, that'd be hard. Okay. Fiction. Okay, so... Cardboard boxes were stacked everywhere, their contents identified with marker scrawls. Fiction, poetry, cooking, local interest, romance. The apartment's through here. Clary headed toward the door she'd indicated, at the far end of the room. Jace caught her arm. Wait. She looked at him nervously. Is something wrong? I don't know. He edged between 2 narrow stacks of boxes and whistled. Clary, you might want to come over here and see this. She glanced around. It was dim in the storage room, the only illumination the porch light shining through the window. It's so dark. Light flared up, bathing the room in a brilliant glow. Simon turned his head aside, blinking. Ouch. Jace chuckled. He was standing on top of a sealed box, his hand raised. Something glowed in his palm, the light escaping through his cupped fingers. Witch light, he said. Simon muttered something under his breath. Clary was already clambering through the boxes, pushing away to Jace. He was standing behind a teetering pile of mysteries, the witchlight casting an eerie glow over his face. Look at that, he said, indicating a space higher up on the wall. At first she thought he was pointing at what looked like a pair of ornamental sconces. As her eyes adjusted, she realized they were actually loops of metal attached to short chains, the ends of which were sunk into the wall. Are those manacles? Said Simon, picking his way through the boxes. That's a... Don't say kinky. Clary shot him a warning look. This is Luke we're talking about. Jace reached up to run his hands along the inside of one of the metal loops. When he lowered it, his fingers were dusted with red-brown powder. Blood. And look, he pointed to the wall around where the chains were sunk in. The plaster seemed to bulge outward. Someone tried to yank these things out of the wall. Tried pretty hard from the looks of it. Clary's heart had begun to beat hard inside her chest. Do you think Luke is all right? Jace lowered the witchlight. I think we'd better find out. The door to the apartment was unlocked. It led into Luke's living room. Despite the hundreds of books in the store itself, there were hundreds more in the apartment. Bookshelves rose to the ceiling, the volumes on them double parked, one row blocking another. Most were poetry and fiction, while plenty of fantasy and mystery thrown in. Clary remembered plowing through the entirety of the Chronicles of Prydian? The Chronicles of Prydian here, curled up in Luke's window seat as the sun went down over the East River. I think he's still around, said Simon, standing in the doorway of Luke's small kitchenette. The percolator's on, and there's coffee here. Still hot. Claire peered around the kitchen door. Dishes were stacked in the sink. Luke's jackets were hung neatly on hooks inside the coat closet. She walked down the hallway and opened the door of his small bedroom. It looked the same as ever. The bed with its gray coverlet and flat pillows unmade. The top of the bureau covered in loose change. She turned away. Some part of her had been absolutely certain that when they walked in, they'd find the place torn to pieces, and Luke tied up, injured or worse. Now she didn't know what to think. Numbly, she crossed the hall to the little guest bedroom where she'd so often stayed when her mother was out of town on business. They'd stayed up late watching old horror movies on the flickering black and white TV. She even kept a backpack full of extra things here so she didn't have to lug her stuff back and forth from home. Kneeling down, she tugged it out from under the bed by its olive green strap. It was covered with buttons, most of which Simon had given her. Gamers do it better, otaku wench, still not king. Inside were some folded clothes, a few spare pairs of underwear, a hairbrush, even shampoo. Thank God, she thought, and kicked the bedroom door closed. Quickly she changed, stripped off Isabel's too big and now grass-stained and sweaty clothes, and pulled on a pair of her own sand-blasted cords, soft as worn paper, and a blue tank top with a design of Chinese characters across the front. She tossed Isabel's clothes in her backpack, yanked the cord shut, and left the bedroom, the pack bouncing familiarly between her shoulder blades. It was nice to have something of her own again. She found Jace in Luke's book-lined office, examining a green duffel bag that lay unzipped across the desk. It was, as Simon had said, full of weapons. Sheathed knives, a coiled whip, and something that looked like a razor-edged metal disc. That's a chakram, said Jace, looking up as Clary came into the room. A sick weapon. You whirl it around your index finger before releasing it. They're rare and hard to use. Strange that Luke would have one. They used to be Hodge's weapon of choice back in the day. Or so he tells me. Luke collects stuff. Art projects, you know, Clary said, indicating the shelf behind the desk, which was lined with Indian statues and Russian icons. Her favorite was a statuette of the Indian goddess of destruction, Kali. Kali. It's definitely Kali, right? Brandishing a sword and a severed head as she danced with her head thrown back and her eyes slitted closed. To the side of the desk was an antique Chinese screen, carved out of glowing rosewood. Pretty things. Jace moved the chakram aside gingerly. A handful of clothes spilled out of the untied end of Luke's duffel bag, as if they had been an afterthought. Is this yours? He drew out a rectangular object hidden among the clothes, a wooden-framed photograph with a long vertical crack along the glass. The crack threw a network of spidery lines across the smiling faces of Clary, Luke, and her mother. That is mine, Clary said, taking it out of his hands. It's cracked, Jace observed. I know. I did that. I smashed it when I threw it at the Ravener demon. She looked at him, seeing the dawning realization on his face. That means Luke's been back to the apartment since the attack. Maybe even today. He must have been the last person to come through the portal, said Jace. That's why it took us here. You weren't thinking of anything, so it sent us to the last place it had been. Nice of Dorothea to tell us he was there, said Clary. Oh, that was a cat going into the cabinet. Ah, I just heard the cabinet door. Have I sent that in Discord? Oh my gosh, I've got a video of my cat going into the cabinet, like the cabinets in the kitchen. And then my other cat staring at where the one cat went in the cabinet, like, what happened? Oh, my stomach is yelling at me. Okay. Nice of Dorothea to tell us he was here, said Clary. He probably paid her off to be quiet. Either that, or she trusts him more than she trusts us. Which means he might not be. Guys! It was Simon, dashing into the office in a panic. Someone's coming! Clary dropped the photo. Is it Luke? Simon peered back down the hall, then nodded. It is, but he's not by himself. There are two men with him. Men. Jace crossed the room in a few strides, peering through the door, and spat a curse under his breath. Warlocks. Clary stared. Warlocks, but... Shaking his head, Jace backed away from the door. Is there some other way out of here? A back door? Clary shook her head. The sound of footsteps in the hallway was audible now, striking pangs of fear into her chest. Jace looked around desperately. His eyes came to rest on the rosewood screen. Get behind that, he said, pointing. Now. Clary dropped the fractured photo on the desk and slipped behind the screen, pulling Simon after her. Jace was right behind them, his stele in hand. He had barely concealed himself when Clary heard the door swing wide open. The sound of people walking into Luke's office. Then voices. 3 men speaking. She looked nervously at Simon, who was very pale, and then at Jace, who had raised the stele in his hand and was moving the tip lightly, in a sort of square shape, across the back of the screen. As Clary stared, the square went clear, like a pane of glass. She heard Simon suck in his breath, a tiny sound, barely audible, and Jace shook his head at them both, mouthing words. They can't see us through it, but we can see them. Biting her lip, Clary moved to the edge of the square and peered through it, conscious of Simon breathing down her neck. She could see the room beyond perfectly, the bookshelves, the desk with the duffel bag thrown across it, and Luke, ragged-looking and slightly stooped, his glasses pushed up to the top of his head, standing near the door. It was frightening enough, even though she knew he couldn't see her, that the window Jace had made was like the glass in a police station interrogation room, strictly one way. Luke turned, looking back through the doorway. Yes, feel free to look around, he said, his voice heavily weighted with sarcasm. Nice of you to show such an interest. A low chuckle sounded from the corner of the office. With an impatient flick of the wrist, Jace tapped the frame of this window, and it opened out wider, showing more of the room. There were 2 men there with Luke, both in long reddish robes, their hoods pushed back. One was thin, with an elegant gray mustache and pointed beard. When he smiled, he showed blindingly white teeth. The other was burly, thick-set as a wrestler, with close-cropped reddish hair. Those are warlocks, Clary whispered softly. Jace had gone rigid all over, stiff as a bar of iron. He's afraid I'll make a run for it. Try to get to Luke, Clary thought. She wished she could reassure him that she wouldn't. There was something about those 2 men and their thick cloaks, the color of artificial blood, that was terrifying. No, he whispered. He was as white as if he'd seen a ghost. Shadow hunters in warlock robes. Consider this a friendly follow-up, Greymark, said the man with the gray mustache. There's nothing friendly about you, Pagborn, Luke said, sat down on the edge of his desk, angling his body so it blocked the men's view of his duffel bag and its contents. Now that he was closer, Clary could see that his face and hands were badly bruised, his fingers scraped and bloody. A long cut along his neck disappeared down into his collar. What on earth happened to him? Blackwell, don't touch that. Is valuable, Luke said sternly. The big red-headed man who had picked up the statue of Kali from the top of the bookcase ran his beefy fingers over it consideringly. Nice, he said. Ah, said Panghorn, taking the statue from his companion. She who was created to battle a demon who could not be killed by any god or man. O Kali, my mother full of bliss, enchantress of the almighty Shiva, in thy delirious joy thou dancest. clapping thy hands together. Thou art the mover of all that moves, and we are but thy helpless toys. Very nice, said Luke. I didn't know you were a student of the Indian myths. All the stories are true, said Panghorn, and Clary felt a small shiver go up her spine. Or have you forgotten even that? I'll forget nothing, said Luke, though he looked relaxed. Clary could see tension in the lines of his shoulders and mouth. I suppose Valentine sent you? He did, said Panghorn. He thought you might have changed your mind. There's nothing to change my mind about. I already told you I don't know anything. Nice cloaks, by the way. Thanks, said Blackwell with a sly grin. Skinned them off a couple of dead warlocks. Those are artificial accord robes, aren't they? Luke asked. Are they from the uprising? Panghorn chuckled softly. Spoils of battle. Aren't you afraid someone might mistake you for the real thing? Not, said Blackwell, once they get up close. Panghorn folded the edge of his robe. Do you remember the uprising, Lucian? He said softly. That was a great and terrible day. Do you remember how we trained together for the battle? Luke's face twisted. The past is the past. I don't know what to tell you, gentlemen. I can't help you now. I don't know anything. Anything is just a general word, so unspecific, said Panghorn, sounding melancholy. Surely someone who owns so many books knows something. If you want to know where to find a jog-toed swallow in springtime, I could direct you to the correct reference title. But if you want to know where the mortal cup has disappeared to, disappeared might not be quite the correct word, purred Panghorn. Hidden, more like hidden by Jocelyn. That may be, said Luke. So hasn't she told you where it is yet? She has not regained consciousness, said Panghorn, carving the air with a long-fingered hand. Valentine is disappointed. He was looking forward to their reunion. I'm sure she didn't reciprocate the sentiment, muttered Luke. Panghorn cackled. Jealous, Greymark, because you no longer feel about her the way you used to? A trembling had started in Clary's fingers, so pronounced that she knitted her hands together tightly to stop them from shaking. Jocelyn? Can they be talking about my mother? I never felt any way about her particularly, said Luke. 2 shadow hunters, exiled from their own kind. You can see why we might be banded together. But I'm not going to try to interfere with Valentine's plan for her, if that's what you're worried about. I wouldn't say he was worried, said Panghorn. More curious. We all wondered if you were still alive, still recognizably human. Luke arched his eyebrows. And? You seem well enough, said Panghorn grudgingly. He set the collie statuette down on the shelf. There was a child, wasn't there? A girl? Luke looked taken aback. What? Don't play dumb, said Blackwell in a snarl of a voice. You know the bitch had a daughter. They found photos of her in the apartment. A bedroom. I thought you were asking about children of mine, Luke interrupted smoothly. Yes. Jocelyn had a daughter, Clarissa. I assume she's run off. Did Valentine send you to find her? Not us, said Panghorn. But he's looking. You could search this place, said Blackwell. I wouldn't advise it, said Luke, and slid off the desk. There was a certain cold menace to his look as he stared down at the 2 men, though his expression hadn't changed. What makes you think she's still alive? I thought Valentine sent raveners to sour the place. Enough ravener poison and most people would crumble away to ash, leave no trace behind. The ravener was killed, said Panghorn. It made Valentine suspicious. Everything makes Valentine suspicious, said Lucas. Maybe Jocelyn killed it. She was certainly capable. Blackwell grunted. Maybe. Luke shrugged. Look, I've got no idea where the girl is, but for what it's worth, I guess she's dead. She'd have turned up by now otherwise. Anyway, she's not much of a danger. She's 15 years old. She never heard of Valentine, and she doesn't believe in demons. Panghorn chuckled. A fortunate child. Not anymore, said Luke. Blackwell raised his eyebrows. You sound angry, Lucian. I'm not angry. I'm exasperated. I'm not planning on interfering with Valentine's plan. Do you understand that? I'm not a fool. Really, said Blackwell. It's nice to see that you've developed a healthy respect for your own skin over the years, Lucian. You weren't always so pragmatic. You do know, said Pronghorn, his tone controversial, that we trade her, Jocelyn, for the cup? Safely delivered right to your door? That's a promise from Valentine himself. I know, said Luke. I'm not interested. I don't know where your precious cup is, and I don't want to get involved in your politics. I hate Valentine, he added, but I respect him. I know he'll mow down anyone in his path. I intend to be out of his way when it happens. He's a monster, a killing machine. Look who's talking, snarled Blackwell. I take it these are your preparations for removing yourself from Valentine's path, said Pronghorn, pointing a long finger at the half-concealed duffel bag on the desk. Getting out of town, Lucian? Luke nodded slowly. Going to the country. I plan to lay low for a while. We could stop you, said Blackwell. Make you stay. Luke smiled. It transformed his face. Suddenly he was no longer the kind, scholarly man who'd pushed Clary on the swing of the park and taught her how to ride a tricycle. Suddenly there was something feral behind his eyes, something vicious and cold. You could try. Panghorn glanced at Blackwell, who shook his head once slowly. Panghorn turned back to Luke. You'll notify us if you experience any sudden memory resurgence? Luke was still smiling. You'll be first on my list to call. Panghorn nodded shortly. I suppose we'll take our leave. The angel guard you, Lucian. The angel does not guard those like me, said Luke. He picked up the duffel bag off the desk and nodded the top. On your way, gentlemen. Lifting their hoods to cover their faces again, the two men left the room, followed a moment later by Luke. He paused a moment at the door, glancing around as if he wondered if he'd forgotten something. Then he shut it carefully behind him. Clary stayed where she was, frozen. Ooh, story time! Yeah, hi, Papas. Reading City of Bones. This is chapter 8, though, so if you've never read it, you might be a little lost. I've only read this book. I'm hoping to read the whole series, but yeah, story time. Good morning. Clary stayed where she was, frozen, hearing the front door swing shut and the distant jingle of a chain and keys as Luke refastened the padlock. She kept seeing the look on Luke's face. Over and over, as he said he wasn't interested in what happened to her mother. She felt a hand on her shoulder. Clary, it was Simon, his voice hesitant, almost gentle. Are you okay? You never read it? Ooh, you might be a little bit lost, but it's okay. If you have questions, I'll answer them. She shook her head, mutely. She felt far from okay. In fact, she felt like she'd never been okay again. She'd never be okay again. Of course she isn't. It was Jace, his voice sharp and cold as ice shards. He took hold of the screen and moved it aside sharply. At least now we know who would send a demon after your mother. Those men think she has the mortal cup. Clary felt her lips thin into a straight line. That's totally ridiculous and impossible. Maybe, said Jace, leaning against Luke's desk. He fixed her with eyes as opaque as smoked glass. Have you ever seen those men before? No, she shook her head. Never. Lucian seemed to know them, to be friendly with them. I wouldn't say friendly, said Simon. I'd say they were suppressing their hostility. They didn't kill him outright, said Jace. They think he knows more than he's telling. Maybe, said Clary. Or maybe they're just reluctant to kill another shadow hunter. Jace laughed, a harsh, almost vicious noise that raised the hairs up on Clary's arm. I doubt that. She looked at him hard. What makes you so sure? Do you know them? The laughter had gone from his voice entirely when he replied. Do I know them? He echoed. You might say that. Those are the men who murdered my father. Oh! Okay. Suspense! I'm now on chapter 9. You missed it, Papas. This is the first time I've, tagged a book with, little tabs. I was, there was one of them was a spoiler alert that I read it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I remember this. And then, the other one was something I didn't know was in this book, and it was this sounds like Dungeons and Dragons. I was like, what? Okay. I have only read this book, and there's, 6 in this specific series. And so, after this book, if I keep reading it, it'll be all new to me as well. So, I don't know, I'm kind of excited about this whole reading thing. I have a, Papa's, I have it up on Discord, for a poll to vote on which day would be best to do the reading stream, because I would like people to be there, because I have Radar. She like wants to listen to this book. Like, she just bought this book to read it. Oh, my camera. There we go. She just bought this book to read it and was really excited that I was reading it. So then I posted it on Discord to see what day would be best to like listen to this on my normal stream times, and then like pick a day to do it. Tonight is girls' night. Yeah. Oh, stretch. I need to put like that stretch channel point back if I don't have it. Do I still have it in my channel points? Hydrate. Stretch. Yep, I do have it in there still. Okay. I'll redeem my own. Stretch. Perfect. Okay. Okay. Chapter 9. The Circle and the Brotherhood. Clary stepped forward to touch Jace's arm. Say something. Anything. What did you say to someone who's just seen his father's killers? Her hesitation turned out not to matter. Jace shrugged her touched off, as if it stung. We should go, he said, stalking out of the office and into the living room. Clary and Simon hurried after him. We don't know what Luke might come back. Oh my gosh, now Jace has a freaking country accent. I need to stop that. I talked in Luke's accent for too long. Now Jace has the accent. Stop. They left through the back entrance, Jace using his stell to lock up behind them and make their way out onto the silent street. The moon hung like a locket over the city, casting pearly reflections on the water of the East River. The distant hum of cars going by over the Williamsburg Bridge filled the humid air with a sound like beating wings. Simon said, Does anyone want to tell me where we're going? To the L train, said Jace calmly. You've got to be kidding me, Simon said, blinking. Demon Slayers take the subway. It's faster than driving. I thought it'd be something cooler, like a van with death to demons painted on the outside, or Jace didn't even bother to interrupt. Clary shot Jace a sideways look. Sometimes, when Jocelyn was really angry about something or was in one of her upset moods, she would get what Clary called scary calm. It was a calm that made Clary think of the deceptive hard sheen of ice just before it cracked under your weight. Jace was scary calm. His face was expressionless, but something burned at the back of his tawny eyes. Simon, she said, enough. Simon shot her a look as if to say, Whose side are you on? But Clary ignored him. She was still watching Jace as they turned onto Kent Avenue. The lights of the bridge behind them lit his hair to an unlikely halo. She wondered if it was wrong that she was glad in some way that the men who'd taken her mother were the same men who'd killed Jace's father all those years ago. For now, at least, he'd have to help her find Jocelyn, whether he wanted to or not. For now, at least, he couldn't leave her alone. Ooh, ooh. Ooh. Jordan Davo. Must have been spam, I guess? I feel like I've been getting spam a lot recently. I really hope that was spam. I just included Saribot in my chats. So. Okay. Gap. You live here? Simon said, staring up at the old cathedral with its broken-in windows and doors sealed with yellow police tape. But it's a church. Jace reached into the neck of his shirt and pulled out a brass key at the end of a chain. It looked like the sort of key one might use to open an old chest in an attic. Clary watched him curiously. He hadn't locked the door behind him when they left the Institute before, just let it slam shut. We find it useful to inhabit hallowed ground. I get that, but no offense, this place is a dump, Simon said, looking dubiously at the bent iron fence that surrounded the ancient building, the trash piled up beside the steps. Clary let her mind relax. She imagined herself taking one of her mother's turpentine rags and dabbing it at the view in front of her, cleaning away the glamour as if it were old paint. There it was, the true vision, glowing through the false one like light through dark glass. She saw the soaring spires of the cathedral, the dull gleam of the leaded windows, the brass plate fixed to the stone wall beside the door, the Institute's name etched into it. She held the vision for a moment before letting it go almost with a sigh. It's a glamour, Simon, she said. It doesn't really look like this. If this is your idea of glamour, I'm having second thoughts about letting you make me over. Chase fitted the key into a lock, glancing over his shoulder at Simon. I'm not sure you're quite sensible of the honor I'm doing you, he said. You'll be one of the few mundanes who has ever been inside the Institute. Dang, there's the accent again. It's fine. Probably smells like the rest of them anyway. Ignore him, Clary said to Jace and elbowed Simon in the side. He always says exactly what comes to his head. No filters. Filters are for cigarettes and coffee, Simon muttered under his breath as they went inside. 2 things I could use right now, incidentally. Clary thought longingly of coffee as they made their way up a winding set of stone stairs, each one carved with a glyph. She was beginning to recognize some of them. They tantalized her sight the way half-heard words in a foreign language sometimes tantalized her hearing, as if just by concentrating hard she could force some meaning out of them. Clary and the 2 boys reached the elevator and rode up in silence. She was thinking about coffee, big mugs of coffee that were half milk the way her mother would make them in the morning. Sometimes Luke would bring them bags of sweet rolls from the Golden Carriage Bakery in Chinatown. At the thought of Luke, Clary's stomach tightened, her appetite vanishing. The elevator came to a hissing stop, and they were again in the entryway Clary remembered. Jace shrugged off his jacket, threw it over the back of a nearby chair, and whistled through his teeth. In a few seconds, Church appeared, slinking low to the ground, his yellow eyes gleaming in the dusty air. Church is a cat. Church, Jace said, kneeling down to stroke the cat's gray head. Where's Alec, Church? Where's Hodge? Church arched his back and meowed. Jace crinkled his nose, while Clary Jace crinkled his nose, which Clary might have found cute in other circumstances. Are they in the library? He stood up, and Church shook himself, trotted a little way down the corridor, and glanced back over his shoulder. Chase followed the cat, as if this were the most natural thing in the world, indicating with a wave of his hand that Clary and Simon were to fall and step behind him. I don't like cats, Simon said, his shoulder bumping Clary's as they maneuvered the narrow hallway. It's unlikely, Jace said, knowing Church, that he likes you either. They were passing through one of the corridors that were lined with bedrooms. Simon's eyes rose. How many people live here exactly? It's an institute, Clary said, a place where shadow hunters can stay when they're in the city, like a sort of combination safe haven and research facility. I thought it was a church. It's inside a church. Because that's not confusing. She could hear the nerves under his flippant tone. Instead of shushing him, Clary reached down and took his hand, winding her fingers through his cold ones. His hand was clammy, but he returned the pressure with a grateful squeeze. I know it's weird, she said quietly, but you just have to go along with it. Trust me. Simon's dark eyes were serious. I trust you, he said. I don't trust him. He cut his glance towards Chase, who was walking... Jace! I keep saying Chase or something. He was walking into a few paces ahead of them, apparently conversing with the cat. Clary wondered what they were talking about. Politics? Opera? The high price of tuna? Well, try, she said. Right now, he's the best chance I'm going to have at finding my mom. A little shudder passed over Simon. This place feels not right to me, he whispered. Clary remembered how she'd felt waking up here this morning, as if everything were both alien and familiar at the same time. For Simon, clearly, there was nothing of that familiarity, only the sense of the strange and alien and inimical? You don't have to stay with me, she said, though she'd fought Jace on the train for the right to keep Simon with her, pointing out that after his 3 days of watching Luke, he might well know something that would be useful to them once they had a chance to break it down in detail. Yes, Simon said, I do. And he let go of her hand as they turned through a doorway and found themselves inside a kitchen. It was an enormous kitchen, and unlike the rest of the institute, it was all modern, with steel counters and glass end shelves holding rows of crockery. Next to a red cast iron stove stood Isabel, a round spoon in her hand, her dark hair pinned up on top of her head. Be right back. Sorry, had to take a call from work. Okay. Steam was rising from the pot, and ingredients were strewn everywhere. Tomatoes, chopped garlic and onions, strings of dark-looking herbs, grated piles of cheese, some shelled peanuts, a handful of olives, and a whole fish, its eyes staring glassily upward. I'm making soup, Isabel said, waving a spoon at Jace. Are you hungry? She glanced behind them then, her dark gaze taking in Simon as well as Clary. Oh my God, she said with finality. You brought another Mundy here. Hodge is going to kill you. Simon cleared his throat. I'm Simon, he said. Isabel ignored him. Jace Whalen, she said. Explain yourself. Jace was glaring at the cat. I told you to bring me to Alec. Backstabbing Judas. Church rolled onto his back, purring contently. Don't blame Church, Isabel said. It's not his fault. Hodge is going to kill you. She plunged the spoon back into the pot. Clary wondered what exactly peanut, fish, oil, olive, tomato soup tasted like. I had to bring him, Jay said. Isabel, today I saw 2 of the men who killed my father. Isabel's shoulders tightened, but when she turned around, she looked more upset than surprised. I don't suppose he's one of them, she asked, pointing her spoon at Simon. To Clary's surprise, Simon said nothing to this. He was too busy staring at Isabel, wrapped in open mouth. Of course, Clary realized with a sharp stab of annoyance. Isabel was exactly Simon's type. Tall, glamorous, and beautiful. Come to think of it, maybe that was everyone's type. Clary stopped wondering about the peanut fish olive tomato soup and started wondering what would happen if she dumped the contents of the pot on Isabel's head. Of course not, she said. Do you think he'd be alive now if he were? Isabel cast an indifferent look at Simon. I suppose not, she said, absently dropping a piece of fish on the floor. Church fell on it ravenously. No wonder he brought us here, said Jace disgustingly. I can't believe you've been stuffing him with fish again. He's looking distinctly podgy. He does not look podgy. Besides, none of the rest of you ever eat anything. I got this recipe from a waiter sprite at the Chelsea market. He said it was delicious. If you knew how to cook, maybe I would eat, Jace muttered. Isabel froze, her spoon poised dangerously. What did you say? Jace edged toward the fridge. I said I'm going to look for a snack to eat. That's what I thought you said. Isabel returned her attention to the soup. Simon continued to stare at Isabel. Clary, inexplicably furious, dropped her backpack on the floor and followed Jace to the refrigerator. I can't believe you're eating, she hissed. What should I be doing instead? He inquired with maddening calm. The inside of the fridge was filled with milk cartons, whose expiration dates reached back several weeks, and plastic Tupperware containers labeled with masking tape lettered in red ink, Hodges. Do not eat. Wow, he's like a crazy roommate, Clary observed, momentarily diverted. What, Hodge? He just likes things in order. Jace took one of the containers out of the fridge and opened it. Spaghetti. Don't ruin your appetite, Isabel called. That, said Jace, kicking the fridge door shut and seizing a fork from a drawer, is exactly what I intend to do. He looked at Clary. Want some? She shook her head. Of course not, he said, round a mouthful. You ate all those sandwiches. It wasn't that many sandwiches, she glanced over at Simon, who appeared to have succeeded in engaging Isabel in conversation. Can we go find Hodge now? You seem awfully eager to get out of here. Don't you want to tell him what we saw? I haven't decided yet. Jace set the container down and thoughtfully licked spaghetti sauce off his knuckle. But if you want to go so badly, I do. Fine. He seemed awfully calm, she thought, not scary calm, as he had been before, but more contained than he ought to be. She wondered how often he let glimpses of his real self peek through the facade that was as hard and shiny as the coat of lacquer on one of her mother's Japanese boxes. Where are you going? Simon looked up as she reached the door. Jagged bits of dark hair fell into his eyes. He looked stupidly dazed. Clary thought unkindly, as if someone had hit him across the back of the head with a 2x4. To find Hodge, she said. I need to tell him about what happened at Luke's. Isabel looked up. Are you going to tell me that you saw those men, Jace? The ones that... I don't know, he cut her off. So keep it to yourself for now. She shrugged. All right. Are you going to come back? Do you want any soup? No, said Jace. Do you think Hodge will want any soup? No one wants any soup. I want some soup, Simon said. No, you don't, said Jace. You just want to sleep with Isabel. Simon was appalled. That is not true. How flattering, Isabel murmured into the soup, but she was smirking. Oh, yes it is, said Jace. Go ahead and ask her. Then she can turn you down and the rest of us can get on with our lives while you fester in miserable humiliation. Damn! He snapped his fingers. Hurry up, Mundy boy, we've got work to do. Simon looked away, flushed with embarrassment. Clary, who a moment ago would have been meanly pleased, felt a rush of anger toward Jace. Leave him alone, she snapped. There's no need to be sadistic just because he isn't one of you. One of us, said Jace, but the sharp look had gone out of his eyes. I'm going to find Hodge. Come along or not, it's your choice. The kitchen door swung shut behind him, leaving Clary alone with Simon and Isabel. Isabel laid out some soup into a bowl and pushed it across the counter toward Simon without looking at him. She was still smirking, though. Clary could feel it. The soup was dark green color, studded with floating brown things. I'm going with Jace, Clary said. Simon? I think I'm gonna start here, he mumbled, looking at his feet. What? I'm going to stay here, Simon parked himself on a stool. I'm hungry. Fine. Clary's throat felt tight, as if she'd swallowed something either very hot or very cold. She stalked out of the kitchen, church slinking at her feet like a cloudy gray shadow. In the hallway, Jace was twirling one of the seraph blades between his fingers. He pocketed it when he saw her. Kind of you to leave the lovebirds to be. Clary frowned at him. Why are you always such an asshat? An asshat? He looked as if he were about to laugh. What you said to Simon. I was trying to save him some pain. Isabel will cut out his heart and walk all over it in high-heeled boots. That's what she does to boys like that. Is that what she did to you? Clary said, but Jace only shook his head before turning to church. Hodge, he said, and really Hodge this time. Bring us anywhere else, and I'll make you into a tennis racket. The Persian snorted and slunk down the hall ahead of them. Clary trailed a little behind Jace, could see the stress and tiredness in the lines of Jace's shoulders. She wondered if the tension ever really left him. Jace? He looked at her. What? I'm sorry for snapping at you. He chuckled. Which time? You snap at me too, you know. I know, he said, surprising her. There's something about you that's so irritating, unsettling. She wanted to ask if he meant that in a good or a bad way, but didn't. She was too afraid he'd make a joke out of the answer. She cast about for something else to say. Does Isabel always make dinner for you? She asked. No, thank God. Most of the time the Lightwoods are here, and Maurice, that's Isabel's mother, she cooks for us. She's an amazing cook. He looked dreamy, the way Simon had looked gazing at Isabel over the soup. Then how come she never taught Isabel? They were passing through the music room now, where she'd found Jace playing the piano that morning. Shadows had gathered thickly in the corners. Isabel never wanted to learn. She's always been first and foremost interested in being a fighter. She comes from a long line of women warriors, he said, and there's a tinge of pride in his voice. She's one of the best shadow hunters I've ever known. Better than Alec? Church, streaking soundlessly ahead of them through the gloom, came to a sudden halt and meowed. He was crouched at the foot of a metal spiral staircase that spun up into a hazy half-light overhead. So he's in the greenhouse, Jace said. It took Clary a moment before she realized he was speaking to the cat. No surprise there. The greenhouse, Clary said. Jace swung himself into the first step. Hodge likes it up there. He grows medicinal plants, things we can use. Most of them only grow in Idris. I think it reminds him of home. Clary followed him, her shoes clattering on the metal steps. Jace's didn't. Is he better than Isabel? She asked again. Alec, I mean. He paused and looked down at her, leaning down from the steps as if he were poised to fall. She remembered her dream. Angels, falling and burning. Better, he said. At demon slaying? No, not really. He's never killed a demon. Really? I don't know why not. Maybe because he's always protecting Izzy and me. They had reached the top of the stairs, a set of double doors greeting them, carved with patterns of leaves and vines. Jace shouldered them open. The smell struck Clary the moment she passed through the doors. A green, sharp smell, the smell of living and growing things, of dirts and the roots that grow in dirt. She had been expecting something much smaller, something the size of the little greenhouse out behind St. Xavier's, where the AP biology students cloned pea pods or whatever it was they did. This was a huge, glass-walled enclosure, lined with trees whose thickly leaved branches breathed out cool green scented air. There were bushes hung with glossy berries, red and purple and black, and small trees hung with oddly shaped fruit she'd never seen before. Clary exhaled. It smells like springtime, she thought, before the heat comes and crushes the leaves into pulp and withers the petals off the flowers. Home, said Jace, to me. He pushed aside a hanging frond and ducked past it. Clary followed. The greenhouse was laid out in what seemed to Clary's untrained eye no particular pattern, but everywhere she looked was a riot of color. Blue-purple blossoms spilling down the side of a shining gray hedge, a trailing vine studded with jewel-toned orange buds. They emerged into a clearing space, where a low granite bench rested against the bole of a drooping tree with silvery green leaves. Water glimmered in a stone-bound rock pool. Hodge sat on the bench, his blackbird perched on his shoulder. He had been staring thoughtfully down at the water, but looked skyward at their approach. Clary followed his gaze upward and saw the glass roof of the greenhouse shining above them like the surface of an inverted lake. You look like you're waiting for something, Jace observed, breaking a leaf off a nearby bough and twirling it between his fingers. For someone who seemed so contained, he had a lot of nervous habits. Perhaps he just liked to be constantly in motion. I was lost in thought. Hodge rose from the bench, stretching out his arm for Hugo. The smile faded from his face as he looked at them. What happened? You look as if... We were attacked, Jace said shortly. Forsaken. Forsaken warriors? Here? Warrior, said Jace. We only saw one. But Dorothea said there were more. Clary added. Dorothea? Hodge held a hand up. This might be easier if you took events in order. Right, said Jace gave Clary a warning look, cutting her off before she could start talking. Then he launched into a recital of the afternoon's events, leaving out only one detail, that the men in Luke's apartment had been the same men who'd killed his father 7 years ago. Clary's mother's friend, or whatever he is really, goes by the name Luke Garraway, Jace finished finally. But while we were at his house, the two men who claimed they were emissaries of Valentine referred to him as Lucien Greymark. And their names were Pangborn, said Jace, and Blackwell. Hodge had gone very pale. Against his gray skin, the scar along his cheek stood out like a twist of red wire. It is as I feared, he said, half to himself. The circle is rising again. Clary looked at Jace for clarification, but he seemed as puzzled as she was. The circle, he said. Hodge was shaking his head as if trying to clear cobwebs from his brain. Come with me, he said. It's time I showed you something. Pause. The glass lamps were lit in the library, and the polished oak surfaces on the furniture seemed to smolder like somber jewels, streaked with shadows. The stark faces of the angels holding up the enormous desk looked even more suffused with pain. Clary sat on the red sofa, legs drawn up, Jace leaning restlessly against the sofa arm beside her. Hodge, if you need help looking... Not at all. Hodge emerged from behind the desk, brushing dust from the knees of his trousers. I've found it. He was carrying a large book bound in brown leather. He paged through it with an anxious finger, blinking owl-like behind his glasses and muttering, Where? Ah, here it is. He cleared his throat before reading aloud. I hereby render unconditionally obedience to the Circle and its principles. I will be ready to risk my life at any time for the Circle, in order to preserve the purity of the bloodlines of Adris, and for the mortal world with whose safety we are charged. Jace made a face. What is that from? It was the loyalty oath of the Circle of Raziel, 20 years ago, said Hodge, sounding strangely tired. It sounds creepy, said Clary, like a fascist organization or something. Hodge set the book down. He looked as pained and grave as the statuary angels beneath the desk. Where was I? They were a group, he said slowly, of shadow hunters, led by Valentine, dedicated to wiping out all downworlders. and returning the world to a purer state. Their plan was to wait for the Downworlders to arrive in Idris to sign the Accords. Approximately every 15 years they must be signed again, to keep their magic potent. He added for Clary's benefit. Then, they planned to slaughter them all, unarmed and defenseless. This terrible act, they thought, would spark off a war between humans and Downworlders, one they intended to win. That was the uprising, said Jace, finally recognizing in Hodge's story one that was already familiar to him. I didn't know Valentine and his followers had a name. The name isn't spoken often nowadays, said Hodge. Their existence remains an embarrassment to the Clave. Most documents pertaining to them have been destroyed. Then why do you have a copy of that oath? Jace asked. Hodge hesitated, only for a moment, but Clary saw it, and felt a small and inexplicable shiver of apprehension run up her spine. Because, he said finally, I helped write it. Jace looked up at that. You were in the circle? I was. Many of us were. Hodge was looking straight ahead. Clary's mother as well. Clary jerked back as if he'd slapped her. What? I said, I know what you said. My mother would never have belonged to something like that. Some kind of hate group? It wasn't, Jace began, but Hodge cut him off. I doubt, he said slowly, as if the words pained him, that she had much of a choice. Clary stared. What are you talking about? Why wouldn't she have had a choice? Because, Hodge said, she was Valentine's wife. Oh, she's Valentine's daughter. Oh, okay. My stomach is yelling at me. Cold coffee. Are there some crackers left in this? There's a couple crackers left in this. Okay. Okay. So, I'm about to butcher this Latin so hard. But, moving on to part 2 of the book. Part 2. Easy is the descent. Facilis descensus averno. Noctis attic des patent atri inanu ditis. Sed revocari gradum suppressusc evander ad ores. Hoc opus hic labor est. Vigil, the Aeneid. I probably butchered the crap out of that Italian. It's fine. Or Latin. It's Latin, not Italian. Chapter 10. City of Bones. There was a moment of astonished silence before both Clary and Jace began speaking at once. Valentine had a wife? He was married? I thought, that's impossible. My mother would never. She was only ever married to my father. She didn't even have an ex-husband. Hodge raised his hands warily. Children. I'm not a child. Clary spun away from the desk, and I don't want to hear any more. Clary, said Hodge. The kindness in his voice hurt. She turned slowly and looked at him across the room. She thought how odd it was that, with his gray hair and scarred face, he looked so much older than her mother. And yet they had been young people together, had joined the circle together, had known Valentine together. My mother wouldn't, she began, and trailed off. She was no longer sure how well she knew Jocelyn. Her mother had become a stranger to her, a liar, a hider of secrets. What wouldn't she have done? Your mother left the circle, said Hodge. He didn't move toward her, but watched her across the room with a bird's bright-eyed stillness. Once we realized how extreme Valentine's views had become, once we knew what he was prepared to do, many of us left. Lucien was the first to leave. That was a blow to Valentine. They had been very close. Hodge shook his head. Then Michael Wayland, your father, Jace. Jace raised his eyebrows, but said nothing. There were those who stayed loyal. Pangborn, Blackwell, the Lightwoods. The Lightwoods? The Lightwoods? You mean Robert and Maris? Maurice. Jace looked thunderstruck. What about you? When did you leave? I didn't, said Hodge softly. Neither did they. We were afraid. Too afraid of what he might do. After the uprising, the loyalists like Blackwell and Pangborn fled. We stayed and cooperated with the Clave, gave them names, helped them track down the ones who had run away. For what we received clemency. For that we received clemency. Clemency. Jace look was quick, but Hodge saw it. He said, "There are things the curse that binds me here, aren't you? You are thinking of the curse that binds me here, aren't you? You always assumed it was a vengeance spell cast by an angry demon or warlock. I let you think it, but it is not the truth. The curse that binds me was cast by the Clave." "For being in the circle?" Jace asked, his face a mask of astonishment. "For not leaving it before the uprising." "But the Lightwoods weren't punished," Clary said. "Why not? They'd done the same thing you've done." There were extenuating circumstances in their case. They were married. They had a child. Although it is not as if they reside in this outpost, far from home, by their own choice. We were banished here, the three of us. The four of us, I should say. Alec was a squalling baby when he left the Glass City. They can return to Idris on official business only, and then only for short times. I can never return. I will never see the Glass City again. Jace stared. It was as if he were looking at his tutor with new eyes, Clary thought. Though it wasn't Jace who had changed, he said. "The law is hard, but it is the law." "I taught you that," said Hodge, dry amusement in his voice. "And now you turn my lesson back at me. Rightly, too." He looked as if he had wanted to sink down into a nearby chair, but held himself upright nevertheless, in his rigid posture. There was something of the soldier he had once been, Clary thought. "Why didn't you tell me before," she said, "that my mother was married to Valentine? You knew her name." "I know her as Jocelyn Fairchild, not Jocelyn Frey," said Hodge. "And you were so insistent on her ignorance of the shadow world. You convinced me it could not be the Jocelyn I knew, and perhaps I did not want to believe it. No one would wish for Valentine's return." He shook his head again. "When I sent for the brothers of the Bone City this morning, I had no idea just what news we would have for them," he said. "When the Clave finds out Valentine may have returned, that he is seeking the cup, there will be an uproar. I can only hope it does not disturb the accords." "I bet Valentine would like that," Jace said. "But why does he want the cup so badly?" Hodge's face was gray. "Isn't that obvious?" he said. "So he can build himself an army." Jace looked startled. "But that would never—" "Dinner time!" It was Isabel, standing framed in the door of the library. She still had the spoon in her hand, though her hair had escaped from its bun and was straggling down her neck. "Ah! Fly! Forehead! Ah!" "No. M&M's for breakfast." "Sorry if I interrupted," she added as an afterthought. "Dear God," said Jace, "the dread hour is nigh." Hodge looked alarmed. I had a very filling breakfast," he stammered. "I mean lunch. A filling lunch. I couldn't possibly eat." "I threw out the soup," Isabel said, "and ordered Chinese from the place downtown." Jace unhitched himself from the desk and stretched. "Great. I'm starved." "I might be able to eat a bite," admitted Hodge meekly. "You two are terrible liars," said Isabel darkly. "Look, I know you don't like my cooking." "So stop doing it," Jace advised her reasonably. "Did you order mushu pork? You know I love mushu pork." Isabel cast her eyes skyward. "Yes, it's in the kitchen." "Awesome." Jace ducked by her with an affectionate ruffle of her hair. Hodge went after him, pausing only to pat Isabel on the shoulder. Then he was gone, with a funny apologetic duck of the head. Had Clary really only a few minutes before been able to see the ghost in him of his old warrior self? Isabel was looking after Jason Hodge, twisting the spoon in her scarred, pale fingers. Clary said, "Is he really?" Isabel didn't look at him. "Is who really what?" "Jace. Is he really a terrible liar?" Now Isabel didn't turn her eyes on Clary, and they were large and dark and unexpectedly thoughtful. He's not a liar at all. Not about important things. He'll tell you horrible truths, but he won't lie. She paused before she added quietly, That's why it's generally better not to ask him anything unless you know you can stand to hear the answer. Pause. Okay. The kitchen was warm and full of light and the salt-sweet smell of takeout Chinese food. The smell reminded Clary of home. She sat and looked at her glistening plate of noodles, toyed with her fork, and tried not to look at Simon, who was staring at Isabel with an expression more glazed than a General Tso's duckling. Well, I think it's kind of romantic, said Isabel, sucking tapioca pearls through an enormous pink straw. What is? Said Simon, instantly alert. The whole business about Clary's mother being married to Valentine, said Isabel. Jason Hodge had filled her in, though Clary noted that both had left out the part about the Lightwoods having been in the circle, and the curses the Clave had handed down. So now he's back from the dead, and he's come looking for her. Maybe he wants to get back together. I kind of doubt he sent a Ravener demon to her house because he wants to get back together, said Alec, who had turned up when the food was served. Nobody had asked him where he'd been, and he hadn't offered the information. He was sitting next to Jace, across from Clary, and was avoiding looking at her. Oh! Oh, I marked it. It's like, I love it's something you wouldn't expect. I think it's mentioned at the end of this book, I think. So, we'll see. It'll get there at some point. It wouldn't be my move, Jace agreed. First the candy, and then the flowers, and the apology letters, then the ravenous demon horns. In that order. He might have sent her candy and flowers, Isabel said. We don't know. Isabel, said Hodge patiently. This is the man who rained down destruction on Idris, the like of which had never been seen, who sent Shadowhunter against Downworlder and made the streets of the Glass City run with blood. That's sort of hot, Isabel argued. That evil thing. Simon tried to look menacing, but gave it up when he saw Clary staring at him. So why does Valentine want this cup so bad? And why does he think Clary's mom has it? He asked. You said it was so he can make an army, Clary said, turning to Hodge. You mean because you can use the cup to make Shadowhunters? Yes. So Valentine could just walk up to any guy on the street and make a Shadowhunter out of him? Just with the cup? Simon leaned forward. Would it work on me? Hodge gave him a long and measured look. Possibly, he said, but the reason that only a few mundanes are ever chosen to ascend and become Nephilim is that most would never survive the transition. It takes special strength and resilience. Before they can be turned, they must be extensively trained and tested. But Valentine would never bother with that. He would use the cup on any human he could capture, and call out the 20% who survived to be his army. An army he could use to attack the Clave. Alec was looking at Hodge with the same horror Clary felt. How do you know he'd do that? Because, Hodge said, when he was in the circle, that was his plan. He said it was the only way to build the kind of force that was needed to defend our world. But that's murder, said Isabel, who looked a little green. He said that he had made the world safe for humans for 1,000 years, said Hodge, and now there was time to repay us with their own sacrifice. Their lives? Demanded Jace, his cheeks flushed. That goes against everything we're supposed to be about, protecting the helpless, safeguarding humanity. Hodge pushed his plate away. Valentine was insane, he said. Brilliant, but insane. He cared about nothing but killing demons and downworlders. Nothing but making the world pure. He would have sacrificed his own son for the cause, and could not understand how anyone else could not. He had a son, said Alec. I was speaking figuratively, said Hodge, reaching for his handkerchief. He used it to mop his forehead before turning to its pocket. His hand, Clary saw, was trembling slightly. When his land burned, when his home was destroyed, it was assumed that he had burned himself and the cup to ashes rather than relinquish either to the Clave. His bones were found in the ashes, along with the bones of his wife. But my mother lived, said Clary. She didn't die in that fire. And neither, it seems now, did Valentine, said Hodge. The Clave will not be pleased to have been fooled, but more importantly, they will want to secure the cup, and more importantly than that, they will want to make sure Valentine does not. It seems to me that the first thing we do is find Clary's mother, said Jace. Find her, find the cup, get it before Valentine does. This sounded fine to Clary, but Hodge looked at Jace as if he'd proposed juggling nitroglycerine as a solution. Absolutely not. Then what do we do? Nothing, said Hodge. All this is best left to skilled, experienced shadow hunters. I am skilled, protested Jace with a wave of his hand, a silver ring glittering on one slim finger, a ring Clary didn't recall him wearing before. I am experienced. Hodge's tone was firm, nearly parental. I know that you are, but you are still a child, or nearly one. Jace looked at Hodge through slitted eyes. His lashes were long, casting shadows down over his angular cheekbones. In someone else it would have been a shy look, even an apologetic one, but on Jace it looked narrow and menacing. I am not a child. Hodge is right, said Alex. He was looking at Jace, and Clary thought he must be one of the few people in the world who looked at Jace not as if he were afraid of him, but as if he was afraid for him. Okay. I'm tagging the book. Valentine is dangerous. I know you're a good shadow hunter. You're probably the best our age. But Valentine's one of the best there ever was. It took a huge battle to bring him down. And he didn't exactly stay down, said Isabel, examining her forked tines. Apparently. But we're here, said Jace. We're here, and because of the Accords, nobody else is. If we don't do something... We are going to do something, said Hodge. I'll send the Clave a message tonight. They could have a force in a Philum here by tomorrow if they wanted. They'll take care of this. You have done more than enough. Jace subsided, but his eyes were still glittering. I don't like it. You don't have to like it, said Alec. You just have to shut up and not do anything stupid. But what about my mother? Clary demanded. She can't wait for some representative from the Clave to show up. Valentine has her right now. Pangborn and Blackwell said so, and he could be... She couldn't bring herself to say the word torture, but Clary knew she wasn't the only one thinking it. Suddenly, no one at the table could meet her eyes. Except Simon. Hurting her, he said, finishing her sentence. Except Clary. They also said she was unconscious, and that Valentine wasn't happy about it. He seems to be waiting for her to wake up. I'd stay unconscious if I were her, Isabel muttered. But that could be any time, said Clary, ignoring Isabel. I thought the Clave was pledging to protect people. Shouldn't there be shadow hunters here right now? Shouldn't they already be searching for her? That would be easier, snapped Alex, if we had the slightest idea where to look. But we do, said Jace. You do? Clary looked at him, startled and eager. Where? Here. Jace leaned forward and touched his fingers to the side of her temple, so gently that a flush crept up her face. Everything we need to know is locked up in your head, under those pretty red curls. Clary reached up to touch her hair protectively. I don't think... So what are you going to do? Simon asked sharply. Cut her head open to get at it? Jace's eyes sparkled, but he said calmingly, Not at all. The Silent Brothers can help her retrieve her memories. You hate the Silent Brothers, protested Isabel. I don't hate them, said Jace candidly. I'm afraid of them. That's not the same thing. I thought you said they were librarians, said Clary. They are librarians. Simon whistled. Those must be some killer late fees. The Silent Brothers are archivists. But this is not all they are, interrupted Hodge, sounding as if he were running out of patience. In order to strengthen their minds, they have chosen to take upon themselves some of the most powerful runes ever created. The power of these runes is so great that the use of them... He broke off, and Clary heard Alex's voice in her head, saying, They mutilate themselves. Well, it wraps and twists their physical forms. They are not warriors in their sense that other shadow hunters are warriors. Their powers are of the mind, not the body. They can read minds, Clary said in a small voice. Among other things, they are amongst the most feared of all demon hunters. I don't know, said Simon. It doesn't sound so bad to me. I'd rather have someone mess around inside my head than chop it off. Then you're a bigger idiot than you look, said Jace, regarding him with scorn. Jace is right, said Isabel, ignoring Simon. The Silent Brothers are really creepy. Hodge's hand was clenched on the table. They are very powerful, he said. They walk in darkness and do not speak, but they can crack open a man's mind the way you might crack open a walnut, and leave him screaming alone in the dark if that is what they desire. Clary looked at Jace appalled. You want to give me to them? I want them to help you. Jace leaned across the table so close she could see the dark amber flecks in his light eyes. Maybe we don't go to look for the cup, he said softly. Maybe the clave will do that. But what's in your mind belongs to you. Someone's hidden secrets there, secrets you can't see. Don't you want to know the truth about your own life? I don't want someone else in my head, she said weakly. She knew he was right, but the idea of turning herself over to beings that even the shadow hunters thought were creepy sent a chill through her blood. I'll go with you, said Jace. I'll stay with you while they do it. That's enough, Simon said, stood up from the table, red with anger. Leave her alone. Alec glanced over at Simon as if he'd just noticed him, raking tumbled black hair out of his eyes and blinking. What are you still doing here, Mundane? Simon ignored him. I said, leave her alone. Jace glanced over at him, a slow, sweeping, poisonous gaze. Alec is right, he said. The Institute is sworn to shelter shadow hunters, not their mundane friends, especially when they've worn out their welcome. Isabel got up and took Simon's arm. I'll show him out. For a moment it looked like he might resist her, but he caught Clary's eyes across the table as she shook her head slightly. He subsided. Head up, he let Isabel lead him from the room. Clary stood up. I'm tired, she said. I want to go to sleep. You've hardly eaten anything, Jace protested. She brushed aside his reaching hand. I'm not hungry. It was cooler in the hallway than it had been in the kitchen. Clary leaned against the wall, pulling at her shirt, which was sticking to the cold sweat on her chest. Far down the hall, she could see Isabel's and Simon's retreating figures, swallowed up by shadows. She watched them go silently, a shivering, odd feeling growing in the pit of her stomach. When had Simon become Isabel's responsibility, instead of hers? If there was one thing she was learning from all this, it was how easy it was to lose everything you had always thought you'd have forever. Oh. Gap. I don't know how to say it. Dot. Oh, dot, not gap. The room was all gold and white, with high walls that gleamed like enamel, and a roof high above, clear and glittering like diamonds. Clary wore a green velvet dress and carried a gold fan in her hand. Her hair, twisted into a knot that spilled curls, made her head feel strangely heavy every time she turned to look behind her. You see someone more interesting than me? Asked Simon. In the dream, he was mysteriously an expert dancer. He steered her through the crowd as if he were a leaf caught in a river current. He was wearing all black, like a shadow hunter, and it showed his coloring to good advantage. Dark hair, lightly brown skin, white teeth. He's handsome, Clary thought, with a jolt of surprise. There's no one more interesting than you, Clary said. It's just this place. I've never seen anything like it. She turned again as they passed the champagne fountain, an enormous silver dish, the centerpiece a mermaid with a jar pouring sparkling wine down her bare back. People were filling their glasses from the dish, laughing and talking. The mermaid turned her head as Clary passed and smiled. The smile showed white teeth as sharp as a vampire's. Welcome to the Glass City, said a voice that wasn't Simon's. Clary found that Simon had disappeared, and she was now dancing with Jace, who was wearing white. The material of his shirt, a thin cotton. She could see the black marks through it. There was a bronze chain around his throat, and his hair and eyes looked more gold than ever. She thought about how she would like to paint his portrait with the dull gold paint one sometimes saw in Russian icons. Where's Simon? She asked as they spun again around the champagne fountain. Clary saw Isabel there, with Alec, both of them in royal blue. They were holding hands like Hansel and Gretel in the dark forest. This place is for the living, said Jace. His hands were cool on her, and she was aware of them in a way she had never been of Simon's. She narrowed her eyes at him. What do you mean? He leaned close. She could feel his lips against her ear. They were not cool at all. Wake up, Clary, he whispered. Wake up. Wake up. Dot, dot, dot. She bolted upright in bed, gasping, hair plastered to her neck with cold sweat. Her wrists were held in a dark grip. She tried to pull away, then realized who was restraining her. Jace? Yeah, he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. How had she gotten into bed, looking tousled and half awake, with early morning hair and sleepy eyes? Let go of me. Sorry, his finger slipped from her wrist. You tried to hit me the second I said your name. I'm a little jumpy, I guess. She glanced around. She was in the small bedroom furnished in dark wood. By the quality of the faint light coming in through the half-open window, she guessed it was dawn. Or just after. Her backpack was propped against one wall. How did I get here? I don't remember. I found you asleep on the floor in the hallway. Jace sounded amused. Hodge helped me get you into bed. Thought you'd be more comfortable in a guest room than the infirmary. Wow, I don't remember anything. She ran her hands through her hair, pushing draggled curls out of her eyes. What time is it, anyway? About 5. In the morning? She glared at him. You'd better have a good reason for waking me up. Why? Were you having a good dream? She could still hear music in her ears, feel the heavy jewels brushing her cheeks. I don't remember. He stood up. One of the Silent Brothers is here to see you. Hodge sent me to wake you up. Actually, he offered to wake you up himself, but since it's 5 a.m., I figured you'd be less cranky if you had someone nice to look at. Meaning you? What else? I need to drink some water. I didn't agree to this, you know. She snapped. This Silent Brother thing? Do you want to find your mother, he said, or not? She stared at him. You just have to meet Brother Jeremiah. That's all. You might even like him. He's got a great sense of humor for a guy who never says anything. She put her head in her hands. Get out. Get out so I can change. She swung her legs out of bed the moment the door shut behind him. Though it was barely dawn, humid heat was already beginning to gather in the room. She pushed the window shut and went to the bathroom to wash her face and rinse her mouth, which tasted like old paper. 5 minutes later, she was sliding her feet into the green sneakers. She'd changed into cutoffs and a plain black t-shirt, if only her thin, freckled legs looked more like Isabel's lanky, smooth limbs. But it couldn't be helped. She pulled her hair back into a ponytail and went to join Jace in the hallway. Oh, goodness. Oh. Dying. Oh, dying. Okay. Church was there with them, muttering and circling restlessly. What's with the cat? Clary asked. The Silent Brothers make him nervous. Sounds like they make everyone nervous. Jace smiled thinly. Church meows as they set off down the hall, but didn't follow them. At least the thick stones of the cathedral wall still held some of the night's chill. The corridors were dark and cool. When they reached the library, Clary was surprised to see that the lamps were off. The library was lit only by the milky glow that filtered down through the high windows set into the vaulted roof. Hodge sat behind the enormous desk in a suit, his gray streaked hair silvered by the dawn light. For a moment she thought he was alone in the room, that Jace had been playing a joke on her. Then she saw a figure move out of the dimness, and she realized that what she had thought was a patch of darker shadow was a man. A tall man in a heavy robe that fell from neck to foot, covering him completely. The hood of the robe was raised, hiding his face. The robe itself was the color of parchment, and the intricate runic designs along the hem and sleeves looked as if they had been inked there in drying blood. The hair rose along Clary's arms and on the back of her neck, prickling almost painfully. This, said Hodge, is Brother Jeremiah of the Silent City. The man came toward them, his heavy cloak swirling as he moved, and Clary realized what it was about him that was strange. He made no sound at all as he walked, not the slightest footstep. Even his cloak, which should have rustled, was silent. She would almost have wondered if he were a ghost, but no, she thought, as he halted in front of them. There was a strange, sweet smell about him, like incense and blood, the smell of something living. And this, Jeremiah, said Hodge, rising from the desk, is the girl I wrote to you about, Clarissa Frey. The hooded face turned slowly toward her. Clary felt cold to her fingertips. Hello, she said. There was no reply. I decided you were right, Jace, said Hodge. I was right, said Jace. I usually am. Hodge ignored this. I sent a letter to the Clave about this last night, but Clary's memories are her own. Only she can decide how she wants to deal with the contents of her own head. If she wants the help of the Silent Brothers, she should have the choice. Clary said nothing. Dorothea had said there was a block in her mind, hiding something. Of course she wanted to know what it was, but the shadowy figure of the Silent Brother was so, well, silent. Silence itself seemed to flow from him like a dark tide, black and thick as ink. It chilled her bones. Brother Jeremiah's face was still turned toward her, nothing but darkness visible underneath his hood. Mind illusion. Hello. Sorry, looking down and I don't know how 10:42 minutes ago. Hi. Sorry for the late introduction. I'm Jelly. I'm reading City of Bones. It's only my second day on a reading stream, and I've read this book before, but I haven't read the whole series, and the goal is to read the whole series. But hello, welcome. Got any questions? Let me know. I'm on chapter 10? 9, maybe? Somewhere around there. But, hi. Brother Jeremiah's face was still turned toward her, nothing but darkness visible underneath his hood. This is Jocelyn's daughter? Clary gave a little gasp, stepping back. The words had echoed inside her head as if she'd thought them herself, but she hadn't. Yes, said Hodge, and added quickly, but her father was a mundane. That does not matter, said Jeremiah. The blood of the Clave is dominant. Why did you call my mother Jocelyn? Said Clary, searching in vain for some sign of a face beneath the hood. Did you know her? The brothers keep records of all members of the Clave, explained Hodge. Exhaustive records. Not that exhaustive, said Jace, if they didn't even know she was still alive. It is likely that they had the assistance of a warlock in her disappearance. Oh, wait. Oh. I thought this was a thought. It's the person. It is likely that she had the assistance of a warlock in disappearance. Most shadow hunters cannot so easily escape the Clave. There was no emotion in Jeremiah's voice. He sounded neither approving nor disapproving of Jocelyn's actions. There's something I don't understand, Clary said. Why would Valentine think my mom had the mortal cup? If she went through so much trouble to disappear, like you said, then why would she bring it with her? To keep him from getting his hands on it, said Hodge. She, above all people, would have known what would happen if Valentine had the cup, and I imagine she didn't trust the Clave to hold on to it. Nor after Valentine got it away from them in the first place. I guess Clary couldn't keep the doubt from her voice. The whole thing seemed so unlikely. She tried to picture her mother fleeing under cover of darkness with a big gold cup stashed in the pocket of her overalls, and failed. Jocelyn turned against her husband when she found out what he intended to do with the cup, said Hodge. It's not unreasonable to assume she would do everything in her power to keep the cup from falling into his hands. The Clave themselves would have looked first to her if they thought she was still alive. It seems to me, Clary said with an edge to her voice, that no one the Clave thinks is dead is ever actually dead. Maybe they should invest in dental records. My father's dead, said Jace, the same edge in his voice. I don't need dental records to tell me that. Clary turned to him in some exasperation. Look, I didn't mean... That is enough, interrupted Brother Jeremiah. There is truth to be learned here, if you are patient enough to listen to it. Fucking fly! Sorry, distraction. With a quick gesture, he raised his hands and drew the hood back from his face. Forgetting Jace, Clary fought the urge to cry out. The archivist's head was bald, smooth and white as an egg. Darkly indented where his eyes had once been. They were gone now. His lips were crisscrossed with a pattern of dark lines that resembled surgical stitches. She understood now that Alec had meant by mutilation. The brothers of the Silent City do not lie, said Jeremiah. If you want the truth from me, you shall have it, but I shall ask you of the same in return. Clary lifted her chin. I'm not a liar either. The mind cannot lie, Jeremiah moved toward her. It is your memories I want. The smell of blood and ink was stifling. Clary felt a wave of panic. Wait. Clary, it was Hodge, his tone gentle. It is entirely possible that our memories you have buried or repressed, memories formed when you were too young to have a conscious recollection of them, that Brother Jeremiah can reach. It can help us a great deal. She said nothing, biting the inside of her lip. She hated the idea of someone reaching inside her head, touching memories so private and hidden that even she couldn't reach them. She doesn't have to do anything she doesn't want to, she said suddenly. Does she? Clary interrupted Hodge before he could reply. It's all right. I'll do it. Brother Jeremiah nodded curtly and moved toward her with a soundlessness that sent chills up her spine. Will it hurt? She whispered. He didn't reply, but his narrow white hands came up to touch her face. The skin of his fingers was thin as parchment paper, inked all over with runes. She could feel the power in them, jumping like static electricity to sting her skin. She closed her eyes, but not before she saw the anxious expression that crossed Hodge's face. Color swirled up against the darkness behind her eyelids. She felt a pressure, a drawing pull in her head and hands and feet. She clenched her hands, strained against the weight and blackness. She felt as if she was pressed up against something hard and unyielding, being slowly crushed. She heard herself gasp and went suddenly cold all over, cold as winter. In a flash, she saw an icy street, gray buildings looming overhead, an explosion of whiteness stinging her face in freezing particles. That's enough. Jace's voice cut through the winter chill, and the falling snow vanished, a shower of white sparks. Clary's eyes sprang open. Slowly, the library came back into focus, the book-lined walls, the anxious faces of Hodge and Jace. Brother Jeremiah stood unmoving, a carved idol of ivory and red ink. Clary became aware of the sharp pains in her hands, and glanced down to see red lines scored across her skin where her nails had dug in. Jace, Hodge said reprovingly. Look at her hands, Jace gestured toward Clary, who curled her fingers in to cover her injured palms. Hodge put a broad hand to her shoulder. Are you all right? Slowly she moved her head in a nod. The crushing weight had gone, but she could feel the sweat that drenched her hair, pasted her shirt to her back like sticky tape. There is a block in your mind, said Jeremiah. Your memories cannot be reached. A block? A block? Said Jace. You mean she's repressed her memories? No. I mean they have been blocked from her conscious mind by a spell. I cannot break it here. She will have to come to Bone City and stand before the Brotherhood. Oh. A spell? Said Clary incredulously. Who would have put a spell on me? Nobody answered her. Jace looked at his tutor. He was surprisingly pale, Clary thought, considering that this had been his idea. Hodge. She couldn't have known. She shouldn't have to go if she doesn't. It's all right. Clary took a deep breath. Her palms ached where her nails had cut them, and she wanted badly to lie down somewhere dark and rest. I'll go. I want to know the truth. I want to know what's in my head. Jace nodded once. Fine. Then I'll go with you. ... Harda! 30 more pages! M&M snack. Maybe if I put my mic like over here. Oh, sorry, that's probably loud. Maybe if I put my mic over here, I wouldn't like hear my button mashing during other things. Maybe. Then I would need to move my food over here so it's not that loud. There's so many cords over here. Okay, that's my headphones. Wrapped around my mouse. My mouse. Speaker. Not speaker. Microphone. Maybe the clicking won't be so loud now. You probably hear the clicking all the time, though, for... Wow. I didn't realize it was so loud. But that's okay. Okay. Leaving the Institute was like climbing into a wet, hot canvas bag. Humid air pressed down on the city, turning the air to grimy soup. I don't see why we have to leave separately from Brother Jeremiah, Clary grumbled. They were standing on the corner outside the Institute. The streets were deserted except for a garbage truck trundling. What is trundling? What's trundling? To trundle. With reference to a wheeled vehicle or its occupants, move or cause to move slowly and heavily, typically in a noisy or uneven way. Interessante. Okay. The truck trundling slowly down the block. What is he embarrassed to be seen with shadow hunters or something? The Brotherhood are shadow hunters, Jace pointed out. Somehow he managed to look cool despite the heat. It made Clary want to smack him. I suppose he went to get his car? She inquired sarcastically. Jace grinned. Something like that. She shook her head. You know, I'd feel a lot better about this if Hodge had come with us. What? I'm not protection enough for you? It's not protection I need right now. It's someone who can help me think. Suddenly reminded, she clapped a hand over her mouth. Oh, Simon! No. I'm Jace, said Jace patiently. Simon is the wheezy little one with the bad haircut and dismal fashion sense. Oh, shut up, she replied, but it was more automatic than heartfelt. I meant to call before I went to sleep, so if he got home okay. See if he got home okay. Shaking his head, Jace regarded the heavens as if they were about to open and reveal the secrets of the universe. With everything that's going on, you're worried about Weaselface? Don't call him that. He doesn't look like a weasel. You might be right, said Jace. I've met an attractive weasel or two in my lifetime. He looks more like a rat. He does not. He's probably at home, lying in a puddle of his own drool. Just wait till Isabel gets bored with him and you have to pick up the pieces. Is Isabel likely to get bored with him? Clary asked. Jace thought about this. Yes, he said. Clary wondered if perhaps Isabel was smarter than Jace gave her credit for. Maybe she would realize what an amazing guy Simon was. How funny, how smart, how cool. Maybe they'd start dating. The idea filled her with a nameless horror. Lost in thought, it took her several moments to realize that Jace had been saying something to her. When she blinked at him, she saw a wry grin spread across his face. What? She asked, ungraciously. I wish you'd stop desperately trying to get my attention like this, he said. It's become embarrassing. Sarcasm is the last refuge of the imaginatively bankrupt, she told him. I can't help it. I use my rapier wit to hide my inner pain. Your pain will be outer soon if you don't get out of traffic. Are you trying to get run over by a cab? Don't be ridiculous, he said. We could never get a cab that easily in this neighborhood. As if on cue, a narrow black car with tinted windows rumbled up to the curb and paused in front of Jace, engine purring. It was long and sleek and low to the ground like a limousine. The windows curved outward. Jace looked at her sideways. There was amusement in his glance, but also a certain urgency. She glanced at the car again, letting her gaze relax, letting the strength of what was real pierce the veil of glamour. Now the car looked like Cinderella's carriage, except instead of being pink and gold and blue like an Easter egg, it was black as velvet, its windows darkly tinted. The wheels were black, the leather trimmings all black. On the black metal driver's bench was Brother Jeremiah, holding a set of reins in his gloved hands. His face was hidden beneath the cowl of parchment-colored robe. Hair in my mouth. On the other end of the reins were 2 horses, black as smoke, snarling and pawing at the sky. "Get in," said Jace. When she continued to stand there gaping, he took her arm and half pushed her in through the open door of the carriage, swinging himself up after her. The carriage began to move before he had closed the door behind them. He fell back in his seat, plush and glossily upholstered, and looked over at her. "A personal escort to the Bone City is nothing to turn your nose up at it." "I wasn't turning my nose up. I was just surprised. I wasn't expecting... I thought it was a car." "Just relax," said Jace. "Enjoy the new carriage smell." Clary rolled her eyes and turned to look out the window. She wouldn't have thought that a horse and carriage wouldn't have stood a chance in Manhattan traffic. But they were moving downtown easily, their soundless progression unnoticed by the snarl of taxis, buses, and SUVs that choked the avenue. In front of them, a yellow cab switched lanes, cutting off their forward progress. Clary tensed, worried about the horses, and the carriage lurched upwards as the horses sprang lightly to the top of the cab. She choked off a gasp. The carriage, rather than dragging along the ground, sailed up behind the horses, rolling lightly and soundlessly up and over the cab's roof and down the other side. Clary glanced backward as the carriage hit the pavement again with a jolt. The cab driver was smoking and staring ahead, utterly oblivious. "I always thought that cab drivers didn't pay attention to traffic, but this is ridiculous," she said weakly. "Just because you can see through glamour now," Chase lit the end of the sentence, hanging delicately in the air between them. "I can only see through it when I concentrate," she said. "It hurts my head a little." "I bet that's because of the block in your mind. The brothers will take care of that." "Then what?" "Then you'll see the world as it is. Infinite," said Jace with a dry smile. "Don't quote Blake at me." The smile turned less dry. "I didn't think you'd recognize it. You don't strike me as someone who reads a lot of poetry." "Everyone knows that quote because of the Doors." Jace looked at her blankly. "The Doors? They're a band?" "If you say so," he said. I suppose you don't have much time for enjoying music," Clary said, thinking of Simon, for whom music was his entire life, and your line of work. He shrugged. "Maybe the occasional wailing chorus of the Damned." Clary looked at him quickly to see if he was joking, but he was expressionless. "Hi, from Russia. Hello. Welcome in. I'm reading today, so I don't look up very often, but hi. Hello, I'm Jelly. Welcome to chat. I'm currently reading City of Bones by Cassandra Clare, the first book to the Mortal Instruments. I am on some odd chapter. Hold up. There's a lot of pages in this chapter. I'm on chapter 10. But hello, streamer in the US. Probably got that part already, but hi, welcome in. Okay. "But you were playing piano yesterday," she began, "at the Institute. You must..." The carriage lurched upward again. Clary grabbed at the edge of her seat and stared. They were rolling along the top of a downtown M1 bus. From this vantage point, she could see the upper floors of the old apartment buildings that lined the avenue, elaborately carved with gargoyles and ornamental cornices. I got distracted, sorry. "I was just messing around," said Jace without looking at her. "My father insisted I learn to play an instrument." "He sounds strict, your father." Jace's tone was sharp. "Not at all. He indulged me. He taught me everything. Weapons training, demonology, arcane lore, ancient languages. He gave me anything I wanted. Horses, weapons, books, even a hunting falcon. But weapons and books aren't exactly what most kids want for Christmas," Clary thought, as the carriage thunked back down to the pavement. "Why didn't you mention to Hodge that you knew the men that Luke was talking to? That they were the ones who killed your dad?" Jace looked down at his hands. They were slim and careful hands. The hands of an artist, not a warrior. The ring she had noticed earlier flashed on his finger. She would have thought there would have been something feminine about a boy wearing a ring, but there wasn't. The ring itself was solid and heavy-looking, made of a dark, burned-looking silver with a pattern of stars around the band. The letter W was carved into it. "Because if I did," he said, "he wouldn't know I wanted to kill Valentine myself." He would know I'd want to kill Val. And he'd never let me try. You mean you want to kill him for revenge? For justice, said Jace. I never knew who killed my father. No, now I do. This is my chance to make it right. Clary didn't see how killing one person could make right to the death of another, but she sensed there was no point saying that. But you know who killed him, she said. It was those men. You said. Jace wasn't looking at her, so Clary let her voice trail off. They were rolling through Astor Place now, narrowly dodging a purple New York University tram as it cut through traffic. Passing pedestrians looked crushed by the heavy air, like insects pinned under glass. Some groups of homeless kids were crowded around the base of a big brass statue, folding cardboard signs asking for money propped up in front of them. Clary saw a girl with around her own age, with a smoothly shaved bald head leaning against a brown-skinned boy with dreadlocks, his face adorned with a dozen piercings. He turned his head as the carriage rolled by, as if he could see it, and she caught the gleam of his eyes. One of them was clouded, as though it had no pupil. I was 10, Jace said. She turned to look at him. He was without expression. He always seemed like some color drained out of him when he talked about his father. We lived in a manor house, out in the country. My father always said it was safer away from people. I heard them coming up the drive and went to tell him. He told me to hide, so I did. Under the stairs. I saw those men come in. They had others with them. Not men. Forsaken. They overpowered my father and cut his throat. The blood ran across the floor. It soaked my shoes. I didn't move. It took a moment for Clary to realize he was done speaking, and another to find her voice. I'm sorry, Jace. His eyes gleamed in the darkness. I don't understand why mundanes always apologize for things that aren't their fault. I'm not apologizing. It's a way of empathizing, of saying that I'm sorry you're unhappy. I'm not unhappy, he said. Only people with no purpose are unhappy. I've got a purpose. Do you mean killing demons or getting revenge for your father's death? Both. Would your father really want you to kill those men, just for revenge? A shadow hunter who kills another of his brothers is worse than a demon and should be put down like one, Jace said, sounding as if he were reciting the words from a textbook. But are all demons evil? She said. I mean, if all vampires aren't evil and all werewolves aren't evil, maybe... Jace turned on her, looking exasperated. It's not the same thing at all. Vampires, werewolves, even warlocks, they're part human, part of this world, born in it. They belong here. But demons come from other worlds. They're interdimensional parasites. They come to a world and use it up. They can't build, just destroy. They can't make, only use. They drain a place to ashes, and when it's dead, they move on to the next one. It's life they want, not just your life or mine, but all the life of this world. It's rivers and cities, it's oceans, it's everything. And the only thing that stands between them and the destruction of this, he pointed outside the window of the carriage, waving his hand as if he meant to indicate everything in the city, from the skyscrapers uptown to the clog of traffic on Houston Street, is the Nephilim. Oh, Clary said. There didn't seem to be much else to say. How many worlds are there? No one knows. Hundreds, millions maybe. And they're all dead worlds? Used up? Clary felt her stomach drop, though it might have been only the jolt as they rolled up and down a purple mini. That sounds so sad. I didn't say that. The dark orangey light of city haze spilled in through the window, outlining a sharp profile. There are probably other living worlds like ours, but only demons can travel between them, because they're mostly non-corporeal. Partly, but nobody knows exactly why. Plenty of warlocks have tried it, and it's never worked. Nothing from Earth can pass through the wardings between the worlds. If we could, he added, we might be able to block them from coming here, but nobody's even been able to figure out how to do that. In fact, more and more of them are coming through. There used to be only small demon invasions into this world, easily contained. But even in my lifetime, more and more of them have spilled in through the wardings. The Clave is always having to dispatch shadow hunters. And a lot of times, they don't come back. But if you had the mortal cup, you can make more, right? More demon hunters? Clary asked tentatively. Sure, said Jace, but we haven't had the cup for years now, and a lot of us die young, so our numbers slowly dwindle. Aren't you, Clary searched for the right word? Reproducing? Jace burst out laughing just as the carriage came to a sudden sharp left. He braced himself, but Clary was thrown against him. He caught her, hands holding her lightly but firmly away from him. She felt the cool impress of his ring like a sliver of ice against her sweaty skin. Sure, he said. We love reproducing. It's one of our favorite things. Clary pulled away from him, her face burning in the darkness, and turned to look out the window. They were rolling toward a heavy wrought iron gate, trellised with dark vines. We're here, announced Jace as a smooth roll of wheels over pavement turned to the jounce of cobblestones. Clary glimpsed words across the arch as they rolled under it. New York City Marble Cemetery. But they stopped burying people in Manhattan Cemetery a century ago because they ran out of room, didn't they? She said. They were moving down a narrow alleyway with high stone walls on either side. The Bone City has been here longer than that. The carriage came to a shuddering halt. Clary jumped as Jace stretched his arm out, but he was only reaching past her to open the door on her side. His arm was slightly muscled and downed with golden hairs fine as pollen. You don't get a choice, do you? She asked. About being a shadow hunter? You can't just opt out? Not easily, or without risk, he said. The door swung open, letting in a blast of muggy air. The carriage had drawn to a stop on a wide square of green grass, surrounded by mossy marble walls. But if I had a choice, this isn't what I'd choose. Why? She asked. He raised an eyebrow, which made Clary instantly jealous. She'd always wanted to be able to do that. Because, he said, it's not what I'm good at. Oh, it's what... If I had a choice, this is still what I'd choose. Why? Because it's what I'm good at. I had to redo that one. He jumped down from the carriage. Clary slid the edge of her seat, dangling her legs. It was a long drop to the cobblestones. She jumped. The impact stung her feet, but she didn't fall. She swung around in triumph to find Jace watching her. I would have helped you down, he said. She blinked. It's okay. You didn't have to. He glanced behind him. Brother Jeremiah was descending from his perch behind the horses in a silent fall of robes. He cast no shadow on the sun-baked grass. Come, he said. He glided away from the carriage and the comforting lights of 2nd Avenue, moving toward the dark center of the garden. It was clear that he expected them to follow. The grass was dry and crackling underfoot, the marble walls to either side smooth and pearly. There were names carved into the stone of the walls, names and dates. It took Clary a moment to realize that they were grave markers. A chill scraped up her spine. Where were the bodies? In the walls, buried upright as if they'd been walking and alive? She had forgotten to look where she was going. When she collided with something unmistakably alive, she yelped out loud. It was Jace. Don't screech like that. You'll wake the dead. She frowned at him. Why are we stopping? He pointed at Brother Jeremiah, who had come to a halt in front of a statue just slightly taller than he was, its base overgrown with moss. The statue was an angel. The marble of the statue was so smooth that it was almost translucent. The face of the angel was fierce and beautiful and sad. In long white hands, the angel held a cup, its rim studded with marble jewels. Something about the statue tickled Clary's memory with an uneasy familiarity. There was a date inscribed on the base. 1, 2, 3, 4. The words inscribed around it, Nephilim, Facilis Descensus Averini. Is that meant to be the mortal cup, she asked. Jace nodded. And that's the motto of the Nephilim, the shadow hunters. They're on the base. What does it mean? Jace's grin was a white flash in the darkness. It means shadow hunters, looking better in black than the widows of our enemies since 1234. Jace. It means, said Jeremiah, the descent into hell is easy. Nice and cheery, said Clary, but a shiver passed over her skin despite the heat. It's the brother's little joke having that here, said Jace. You'll see. She looked at Brother Jeremiah. He had drawn a steel, faintly glowing from some inner pocket of his robe, and the tip he traced the pattern of a rune on the statue's base. The mouth of the stone angel suddenly gaped wide in a silent scream, and a yawning black hole opened in the grassy turf at Jeremiah's feet. It looked like an open grave. Slowly, Clary approached the edge of it and peered inside. A set of granite steps led down in the hole, their edges worn soft by years of use. Torches were set along the steps at intervals, flaring hot green and icy blue. The bottom of the stairs were almost lost in darkness. Jace took the stairs with the ease of someone who finds a situation familiar if not exactly comfortable. Halfway to the first torch, he paused and looked up at her. Come on, he said impatiently. Clary had barely set her foot on the first step when she felt her arm caught in a cold grip. She looked up in astonishment. Brother Jeremiah was holding her wrist, his icy white fingers digging into the skin. She could see the bony gleam of his scarred face beneath the edge of his cowl. "Do not fear," he said, his voice inside her head. "It would take more than a single human cry to wake these dead." Ooh. When he released his arm, I like that. I'm going to mark it. Because I can. Because I have markers. It would take more than a single human cry to wake these dead. Ooh, okay. When he released her arm, she skittered down the stairs after Jace, her heart pounding against her ribs. He was waiting for her at the foot of the steps. He'd taken one of the green burning torches out of its bracket and was holding it at eye level. It lent a pale green cast to his skin. "You all right?" She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The stairs ended in a shallow landing. Ahead of them stretched a tunnel, long and black, ridged with curling roots of trees. A faint bluish light was visible at the tunnel's end. "It's so dark," she said lamely. "You want to hold my hand?" Clary put both her hands behind her back like a small child. "Don't talk down to me." "Well, I can hardly talk up to you. You're too short." Jace glanced past her, the torch showering sparks as he moved. "No need to stand on ceremony, Brother Jeremiah," he drawled. "Lead on. We'll be right behind you." Clary jumped. She still wasn't used to the archivist's silent comings and goings. He moved noisily from where he had been standing behind her and headed into the tunnel. Noiselessly. I said noisily. Opposite. After a moment, she followed, knocking Jace's outstretched hand aside as she went. "The fly is in my coffee!" "At least it's dead." Damn. I guess it's water for the rest of stream. Me?
No, not you.
Who are you talking to?
Jared.
Oh. Is he here? Sorry about that. Had to go and help my husband find clothes. He's going and golfing. So, okay. There it is. Here, where was I? Okay, so Clary's first sight of the silent city was of row upon row of tall marble arches that rose overhead, disappearing into the distance like the orderly rows of trees in an orchard. The marble itself was pure, ashy ivory, hard and polished looking, inset in places with narrow strips of onyx, jasper, and jade. As they moved away from the tunnel and toward the forest of arches, Clary saw that the floor was inscribed with the same runes that sometimes decorated Jace's skin, with lions and whorls and swirling patterns. As the three of them passed through the first arch, something large and white loomed up on her left side, like an iceberg off the bow of the Titanic. It was a block of white stone, smooth and square, with a sort of door inset into the front. It reminded her of a child-sized playhouse, almost but not quite big enough for her to stand up inside. "It's a mausoleum," said Jace, directing a flash of torchlight at it. Clary could see that a rune was carved into the door, which was sealed shut with bolts of iron. "A tomb. We bury our dead here." "All your dead?" she said, half wanting to ask him if his father was buried here, but he had already moved ahead, out of earshot. She hurried after him, not wanting to be alone with Brother Jeremiah in his spooky place. "I thought you said this was a library." "There are many levels to the silent city," interjected Jeremiah, "and not all the dead are buried here. There is another ossuary in Idris, of course, much larger. But on this level are the mausoleums and the place of burning." I like the breathy sound I'm doing. "The place of burning? Those who die in battle are burned, their ashes used to make the marble arches that you see here. The blood and bone of demon slayers is itself a powerful protection against evil. Even in death, the clave serves the cause." How exhausting, Clary thought, to fill all your life and then be expected to continue that fight even when your life was over. At the edges of her vision, she could see the square white vaults rising on either side of her in orderly rows. Each door locked from the outside. She understood now why this was called the Silent City. Its only inhabitants were mute brothers and the dead they so zealously guarded. They had reached another staircase leading down into more twilight. Jace thrust a torch ahead of him, streaking the walls with shadows. "We're going to the second level, where the archives and the council rooms are," he said, as if to reassure her. "Where are the living quarters?" Clary asked, partly to be polite, partly out of real curiosity. "Where do the brothers sleep?" "Sleep?" The silent word hung in the darkness between them. Jace laughed, and the flame of the torch he held flickered. "You had to ask." At the foot of the stairs was another tunnel, which widened out at the end into a square pavilion, each corner of which was marked by a spire of carved bone. Torches burned in long onyx holders along the sides of the square, and the air smelled of ashes and smoke. In the center of the pavilion was a long slab of black basalt veined in white. Beyond the table, against the dark wall, hung an enormous silver sword, pointed down, its hilt carved in the shape of outspread wings. Seated at the table was a row of silent brothers, each wrapped and cowled in the same parchment-colored robes as Jeremiah. Jeremiah wasted no time. "We have arrived. Clarissa, stand before the council." Clary glanced at Jace, but he was blinking, clearly confused. Brother Jeremiah must have spoken only inside her head. She looked at the table, and the long row of silent figures muffled in their heavy robes. Alternating squares made up the pavilion floor, golden bronze and a darker red. Just in front of the table was a larger square, made of white marble and embossed with parabolic signs of silver stars. Clary stepped into the center of the black square as if she were stepping in front of the firing squad. She raised her head. "All right," she said. "Now what?" The brothers made a sound then, a sound that raised the hairs up along Clary's necks and neck and the backs of her arms. It was a sound like a sigh or a groan. In unison they raised their hands and pushed their cowls back, burying their scarred faces and the pits of their empty eyes. Though she had seen Brother Jeremiah's uncovered face already, Clary's stomach nodded. It was like looking at a row of skeletons, like one of those medieval woodcuts where the dead walked and talked and danced, and on the pile of bodies of the living. Their stitched mouths seemed to grin at her. "The council greets you, Clarissa Frey," she heard, and it was not just one silent voice inside her head, but a dozen, some low and rough, some smooth and monotone, but all were demanding, insistent, pushing at the fragile barriers around her mind. "Stop," she said, and to her astonishment her voice came out firm and strong. The din inside her mind ceased as suddenly as a record that had stopped spinning. "You can go inside my head," she said, "but only when I'm ready. If you do not want our help, there is no need for this. You are the one who asked for our assistance, after all." "You want to know what's in my mind, just like I do," she said. "That doesn't mean you can't be careful about it." The brother who sat in the center seat templed his thin, white fingers beneath his chin. "It is an interesting puzzle, admittedly," he said, and the voice inside her mind was dry and neutral. "But there is no need for the use of force if you do not resist." She gritted her teeth. She wanted to resist them, wanted to pry those intrusive voices out of her head, to stand by and allow such a violation of her most intimate personal self. But there was every chance that had already happened. She reminded herself. This was nothing more than the excavation of a past crime, the theft of her memory. If it worked, what had been taken from her would be restored. She closed her eyes. "Go ahead," she said. The first contact came as a whisper inside her head, delicate as the brush of a falling leaf. "State your name for the council." "Clarissa Frey." The first voice was joined by the others. "Who are you?" "I'm Clary. My mother is Jocelyn Frey. I lived at 807 Berkeley Place in Brooklyn. I am 15 years old. My father's name was..." Her mind seemed to snap in on herself, like a rubber band, and she reeled soundlessly into a whirlwind of images cast against the inside of her closed eyelids. Her mother was hurrying her down a night-black street between piles of heaped and dirty snow. Then a lowering sky, gray and leaden, rows of black trees stripped bare, an empty square cut into the earth, a plain coffin lowered into it, ashes to ashes. Jocelyn wrapped in her patchwork quilt, tears spilling down her cheeks, quickly closing a box and shoving it under a cushion as Clary came into the room. She saw the initials on the box again. J.C. The images came faster now, like the pages of one of those books where the drawings seem to move when you flip them. Clary stood on top of a flight of stairs, looking down a narrow corridor, and there was Luke again, his green duffel bag at his feet. Jocelyn stood in front of him, shaking her head. "Why now, Lucien? I thought you were dead." Clary blinked. Luke looked different, almost a stranger. Bearded, his long hair tangled, and branches came down to block her view. She was in the park again, and green fairies, tiny as toothpicks, buzzed among the red flowers. She reached for one in delight, and her mother swung her up into her arms with a cry of terror. Then it was winter, on the black street again, and they were hurrying, huddled under an umbrella, Jocelyn half pushing and half dragging Clary between the looming banks of snow. A granite doorway loomed up out of the falling whiteness. There were words carved above the door. "The Magnificent." Then she was standing inside an entryway that smelled of iron and melting snow. Her fingers were numb with cold. A hand under her chin directed her to look up, and she saw a row of words scrawled across the wall. 2 words leaped out at her, burning into her eyes. Magnus Bane. A sudden pain lanced through her right arm. She shrieked as the images fell away, and she spun upward, breaking the surface of consciousness like a diver breaking up through a wave. There was something cold pressed against her cheek. She pried her eyes open and saw silver stars. She blinked twice before realizing she was lying on the marble floor, her knees curled up to her chest. When she moved, hot pain shot up her arm. She sat up gingerly. The skin over her left elbow was split and bleeding. She must have landed on it when she fell. There was blood on her shirt. She looked around, disoriented, and saw Jace looking at her, unmoving but very tense around the mouth. Magnus Bane. The words meant something, but what? Before she could ask the question aloud, Brother Jeremiah interrupted her. The block inside your mind is stronger than we had anticipated, he said. It can be safely undone only by the one who put it there. For us to remove it would be to kill you. Oh! Okay. She scrambled to her feet, cradling her injured arm. But I don't know who put it there. If I knew that, I wouldn't have come here. The answer to what is woven into the thread of your thoughts, said Brother Jeremiah. In your waking dreams, you saw it written. Magnus Bane? But that's not even a name. It is enough. Brother Jeremiah got to his feet. As if this were a signal, the rest of the brothers rose alongside him. They inclined their heads toward Jace, a gesture of silent acknowledgement, before they filed away among the pillars and were gone. Only Brother Jeremiah remained. He watched impassively as Jace hurried over to Clary. Is your arm all right? Let me see, he demanded, seizing her wrist. Ouch! It's fine. Don't do that. You're making it worse, Clary said, trying to pull away. You bled on the speaking stars, he said. Clary looked and saw that he was right. There was a smear of her blood on the white and silver marble. I bet there's a law somewhere about that. He turned her arm around, more gently than she would have thought he was capable of. He caught his lower lip between his teeth and whistled. She glanced down and saw that a glove of blood covered her lower arm from the elbow to the wrist. The arm was throbbing, stiff, and painful. Is this where you start tearing strips off your t-shirt to bind up my wound? She joked. She hated the sight of blood, especially her own. If you wanted to rip my clothes off, you should have just asked. He dug into his pocket and brought out his steel. It would have been a lot less painful. Remembering the stinging sensation when the steel had touched her wrist, she braced herself, but all she felt, as the glowing instrument glided lightly over her injury, was a faint warmth. There, he said, straightening up. Clary flexed her arm in wonder. Though the blood was still there, the wound was gone, as was the pain and stiffness. And next time you're planning to injure yourself to get my attention, just remember that a little sweet talk works wonders. Clary felt her mouth twitch into a smile. I'll keep that in mind, she said, as he turned away, and she added, and thanks. He slid the steel into his back pocket without turning to look at her, but she thought she saw a certain gratification in the set of his shoulders. Brother Jeremiah, he said, rubbing his hands together, you've been very quiet all this time. Surely you have some thoughts you'd like to share. I am charged with leading you from the Silent City, and that is all, said the archivist. Clary wondered if she were imagining it, or if it was actually a faintly affronted tone to his voice. We could always show ourselves out, Jace suggested hopefully. I'm sure I remember the way. The marvels of the Silent City are not for the eyes of the uninitiated, said Jeremiah. And he turned his back on them with a soundless swish of robes. This way. Okay. When they emerged into the open, Clary took deep breaths of thick, morning air, relishing the city stench of smog, dirt, and humanity. Jace looked around thoughtfully. It's going to rain, he said. He was right, Clary thought, looking up into the iron-gray sky. Are we taking a carriage back to the Institute? Jace looked from Brother Jeremiah, still as a statue, to the carriage, looming like a black shadow in the archway that led to the street. Then he broke into a grin. No way, he said. I hate those things. Let's hail a cab. Boom. If this chapter's really long, I'm going to call that it. Seven, 8, 9, 10. 4 chapters. Yeah, this one's like really, these chapters get long the farther you go into the book. And the next chapter is like 30 pages. So, I'm going to stop at this one. I have officially tabbed my first book. It's tabbed. I love it. It was fun. So, well, that was page 188. So we start at 189. That's 2 days of reading. There's like just under 400 pages. So or just under 500 pages. So about like 5 weeks, I think. I think I'm reading 2 times this week. If you haven't done the poll in Discord under the book talk page, then go ahead and do that, and then it will help me decide on like when I'm gonna do my read streams, because I was doing it for I was gonna keep doing it on Thursday mornings, but I don't think the people that really want to listen to me reading the book are on Thursday mornings. So yeah, so there's still only 2 votes. So if you want to go in and vote, right now the leading one is Saturday night. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah. So there's that. I'll probably end up posting these. I have to like get it like a YouTube thing up, I guess, and figure out YouTube so I can post these read streams online. But yeah. So I'm gonna go ahead and give Lizzie a raid. So I will be back on later tonight. For girls' night. The plan is to do WoW and later. I don't know how later. It's already noon, so like I might just speed clean my house and then get back on and then do that for the day. But yeah, so I gotta go clean. And then once I'm done, I'll come back on. And we'll be doing girls' night with WoW. I will have to go pick up my baby at daycare. He's at daycare right now, and husband is golfing, so I will have to pick him up. And he'll have to be in the background, so like bear with me. Love my baby. Hopefully I can keep him entertained enough. So I will probably be doing the style trial like all the time. So okay, so we're gonna go ahead and raid Lizzie and show her support. Okay, well, thank you for being here, guys. Much appreciated. Send out love and support. I'll probably be the one there saying raid, but I love you anyway. See you later tonight. And don't forget to fill out the poll saying when you want to hear the reading. So, bye, guys.